We are live. We're ready to go.
Okay, I'll start. Good morning, chairs and members of the committee. I am Greg Hook, your legislative auditor, and today the Office of Legislative Audits, or OLA, will be making a number of presentations which I hope you will find deserving of your attention and of your interest. First, and frankly the primary focus of the meeting, will be the presentation of key results of two fiscal compliance audits, the Motor Vehicle Administration and the State Department of Assessments and Taxation. Next, in keeping with the last JAC hearing of the year tradition, OLA will present a summary of its fraud activity from the soon to be concluded calendar year. To clarify, the presentation will be on investigations we conducted of fraud allegations and not frauds we actually committed, of which I am happy to report there were none. The next segment of the hearing, again in keeping with the last meeting tradition, will be a brief update on repeat audit findings and audit follow-up processes. Finally, as if all that preceded was not enough, we will request that the committee prepare several letters of concern for two agencies that have resisted implementing what OLA believes to be appropriate recommendations related to three audit findings. One benefit of this virtual format is that although the cover page of each of the 5 OLA presentations includes the names of the presenters, OLA has a number of additional staff online with knowledge of the matters discussed. So within the limits of state government 21226, which is our confidentiality statute, we should be well prepared for questions. Before we formally begin, for probably not the last time, I would like to get on my virtual soapbox and take a moment to speak very briefly to the recent Baltimore County Public School audit report that has been in the news of late. Although I cannot directly link the ransomware attack to the weaknesses identified in the OLA audit reports, I do believe that it demonstrates the need for government entities to take timely and appropriate action to implement security best practices for IT operations, as well as other audit findings. Many times our findings highlight weaknesses in processes or controls that may not have yet resulted in a catastrophic failure or significant actual loss, but rather point to the need for agencies to implement actions to prevent such problems from occurring later. Sometimes agencies refer to potential cost as a reason for resisting recommendations or delaying corrective action, but that cost may be less significant than the cost of doing nothing. With that said, I'll move on with the hearing and MVA. MVA, or the Motor Vehicle Administration. Joining me today are Mark Hagenbach, the audit manager, and Kathy Clark, the audit senior, responsible for conducting the audit. I will mention that subsequent to the audit, Kathy has been promoted and is now an audit manager as well. The audit report contained 9 findings over the 3 broad areas of licensing, information systems and controls, and contract procurement and monitoring. In addition to MVA's credit, only 1 finding was repeated in the current report from the 12 findings in the preceding report. The 5 findings in the licensing section in many cases disclosed instances where procedures or policies may have been in place, but were not complied with, or when existing may not have been comprehensive enough to accomplish necessary control. Significantly, several of these findings resulted in the issuance of products to potentially ineligible individuals or the failure to maintain accurate driving records. There were 2 information system findings, one about protecting PII, which I know is of great concern to this committee in general and several members specifically, and the other highlighting the need for current malware protection software on computers. Although I think it is fair to say we met some initial resistance to these findings, I believe that MVA and OLA have reached an understanding, with the malware protection being updated, and for the PII matter, where MVA will hopefully take appropriate corrective action as soon as practicable. MVA intends for the enhanced PII security to be accomplished by implementation of a new IT system next December. Finally, there were 2 contract-related findings on the need to verify the propriety of vendor billings prior to payment and the requirement to safeguard vendor bid documents. With that, I will now turn it over to Mark Hagenbach, the audit manager, to walk you through our PowerPoint presentation. Mark, take it away.
Good morning. And while you were talking, I was juggling my screens because we don't use Zoom that often, so I think I finally have it down here. Good morning. My name is Mark Hagenbach. I'm the audit manager for the audit of the Motor Vehicle Administration. And as Greg said, with us on this meeting also is Catherine Clark, who served as the senior auditor, and as well as Steve Jersey and Brendan Coffey from our Information Systems Audit Unit. Our audit report dated November 23rd, 2020 included 9 findings, 1 of which was repeated from the preceding audit report. Page 2 of the presentation. You could turn to page 2, please. There you go. contains some background information on the Motor Vehicle Administration, or MVA. Now, as most Marylanders are probably aware, MVA is responsible for activities related to registration and titling of vehicles, as well as issuance of various licensing and identification cards, which we will refer to as products. During fiscal 2019, MVA collections totaled $1.8 billion, primarily from excise tax and vehicle registration fees. MVA processed approximately 5.9 million licensing transactions, which resulted in nearly $49 million in revenue. And page 3, please. Page 3 is a summary of the key findings that I will be going over in more detail in the presentation. The findings are primarily related to MVA's procedures over the issuance of products such as licenses and maintenance of related records. On page 4 of the presentation, we start with the first report finding. Now, to provide a bit of a background, certain documents are required in order for individuals to obtain products such as licenses. These documents are intended for MVA to properly assess the individual's identity and age, social security number, and residential address. Our report finding number 1 noted that MVA did not always use available data to prevent, identify, investigate, and cancel products, primarily licenses, including real IDs, that were issued based on questionable documentation. As a result, products may have been issued to ineligible individuals. Now, we identified 2 distinct situations impacted by MVA not using all available data. As previously stated, MVA obtains documents from individuals to verify the customer's address. The address noted on the documentation provided by the customer is recorded in MVA's electronic records, and MVA retains a scanned copy of the paper documentation that was provided. Our analysis of MVA data as of July 2019, as well as records from the State Department of Assessment and Taxation, noted that there were 106 addresses, each with 20 or more individuals, that appeared to be single-family residential dwellings. A picture of one of these addresses is shown in our audit report under this finding, and it's a Baltimore City row house that had 26 individuals licensed at this one dwelling. Further, our review of another one of the 106 addresses, which was associated with products issued to 30 individuals, noted at least 10 instances of fraudulent documents were used to support that address. While MVA had certain procedures to identify some questionable addresses, the procedures were not robust. That is, MVA did not perform a periodic system-wide data analysis to determine if similar situations existed. We also found an instance in which MVA, based on their investigation of a fraud hotline tip, determined that 10 people used fraudulent documentation to support their address to obtain a product. However, MVA did not take action to cancel these products until we brought it to their attention over 1 year after the conclusion of their investigation. Now, for the second part of finding 1, which is on page 5 of our presentation, we found 70 social security numbers that were associated with what appeared to be 140 individuals. We provided this data to MVA, who concluded that 12 numbers were each used by 2 different individuals. In other words, duplicate numbers. The remaining 58 numbers were due to duplicate accounts. For example, a person changes their last name due to marriage. MVA set up a second account that they should have consolidated in their records. Now, while MVA may indicate that the number of actual duplicate social security numbers is minimal, we would like to point out that MVA had procedures in place intended to prevent this from occurring, as well as a secondary procedure designed to detect duplicates if the first procedure did not work. As indicated in our report, MVA's procedures were not functioning as intended, as MVA had not previously identified the potential duplicates that we noted. For finding 2, we turn to page 6 of our presentation. And the finding reads, MVA did not always apply points or suspend or revoke non-commercial licenses as required for serious motor vehicle convictions received in other states. When a driver with a Maryland license receives a serious motor vehicle conviction while driving in another state other than Maryland, the law requires MVA to assess points and suspend or revoke the related license. For example, if a driver licensed in Maryland got convicted of driving under the influence in Pennsylvania, MBA is required to assess 12 points to the record and revoke the driver's license. So MBA performed this process in several steps. They first recorded the convictions in the related driving records, then they assessed the appropriate number of points, and then finally, based on the number of points, they would take the action to suspend or revoke the license. Our audit disclosed that MBA did not record points for 1,275 out of 2,704 out-of-state convictions, which represented 1,172 people. Therefore, no licenses were suspended or revoked as a result of these convictions, since the driving record would not indicate a need for this because they did not record the points. Further, we noted when MBA did record points on the driving records, they did not always suspend or revoke the related license. On page 7 of our presentation, this is the results of our test of 10 out-of-state convictions, with 5 instances where MBA did not record points and 5 where they did. However, MBA did not suspend or revoke any of these 10 licenses. One of the 10 drivers was cited for negligent driving in Maryland within 6 months of a Delaware conviction that should have resulted in a revoked license. Page 8, please. Page 8 of our presentation summarizes findings 3, 4, and 5. For finding 3, MBA has system controls in place to prevent individuals from obtaining products. For example, if the individual had an unpaid debt, the system control would lock the account until the debt is paid. For certain of these controls, an MBA employee may obtain documents from the customer that satisfy the necessary conditions and then process the transactions required to issue the product, effectively overriding or unlocking the system control. MBA supervisors are required to review each system override as well as the supporting documentation to make sure the override was proper. Our audit disclosed instances where the supervisors approved overrides without adequate documentation to ensure the override was proper. Our test of 20 overrides that were approved by the supervisors disclosed that 7 lacked sufficient documentation to support that the conditions had been met, including situations where the individuals had convictions in other states. Further, when the supervisors did reject the overrides, MBA systems still issue the license. In these cases, MBA had no procedure to recover the products. One of the rejected overrides resulted in an individual who had a suspended license in another jurisdiction to obtain a Maryland license without any justification. Finding 4 disclosed that MBA did not always notify other states when it issued a Maryland license. This process is necessary so that the other states may cancel the license they issued to prevent individuals from having more than one active license, for which we found instances of this occurring. Finding 5 is related to individuals who at one time were licensed in another state and subsequently obtained a Maryland license. MBA did not always record driving convictions received in the other states within 30 days of issuances as required by its policy. Over 150,000 non-commercial licenses were issued during January 2017 through July 2019. Our test of 21 of these licenses found that 7 had a conviction in another state, and MBA did not record the conviction in the driving record for 3 of those 7. The 3 licenses were active from 147 to 274 days. On page 9 of our presentation, we show our information systems findings. Finding 6 notes that personally identifiable information, or PII, was stored in a manner that did not provide adequate safeguards. MBA and the Office of the Secretary maintained PII for driving records in a manner that did not provide adequate safeguards. Our audit disclosed 2 databases involving 10.4 and 4.8 million records respectively were maintained in a manner that made the information vulnerable to improper disclosure. In addition, over 1,100 system users had the ability to view PII for approximately 4.8 million licensees. MBA management advised us that its current system has limitations. However, under its new system, which is under development, it will have the ability to safeguard and restrict access to view PII. And MBA in their testimony should be able to provide details on the progress of the implementation of its new system. Finding 7 on page 10. Disclose inadequate procedures for updating malware protection software. We noted over 2,800 computers that were running outdated versions of malware protection software. Also on page 10, findings 8 and 9 are related to contract procurement and monitoring issues. On page 11, we show our recommendations, conclusions and recommendations so that MBA can take corrective actions. I'd like to point out that during our field work, MBA was very cooperative and receptive to our findings as we discussed them periodically prior to developing our audit report. And frequently they would take action well before the discussion notes or audit report were written. And we do appreciate that. Thank you. I'm available if there are any questions.
Thank you for that report. Mr. Hook, do you have anything else to add to that?
No, I don't, Senator. I think Mark did a very comprehensive job, and I do think MVA. I would second Mark. MVA was very responsive, and they have agreed to implement all the recommendations. The only issue I might have is with the PII. Their new system is scheduled to be up and running, I believe, December 2021. So I would just wonder what compensating controls they may have in place for the intervening 12 months before that new system comes online. But other than that, no, nothing to add.
Okay, thank you. Questions from the committee? And if you want to use your raise hand function in the Zoom, we'll review that and monitor that for questions. I see a hand raised from Doug Ahrens.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Just a real quick question. Some of the things that you guys pointed out there about these licenses and the points being spread and not recording them properly when they come into Maryland and they get another license. And you mentioned that something with Delaware and what have you. Is there a liability to the state if one of these licenses doesn't get properly reported and some of these transactions aren't reported and they go out and let's say they kill somebody while driving under a suspended license in another state, and we had that information internally, what's the state's liability on that because we failed to record it properly?
Well, that is a very good question, and I wonder if maybe the Motor Vehicle Administration could answer that when they come up to the virtual table. I don't know. We could certainly ask the Attorney General for advice, but I'm hoping MVA might have an answer for you, Delegate.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, I have a very simple question. I know, thank you to LLA for all of your work on this. I know you've put a lot of time and effort into this review and audit. If the MVA would like to, reach out for input from LLA, since you're also familiar with the system, would LLA be willing to provide that input?
We are certainly, to implement any of our recommendations, we're certainly more than happy to assist them and offer advice on how to implement our recommendations. So the short answer is
yes.
Great, thank you.
I see another question, Senator, from Senator Hester.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. My question is very similar to Mr. Hook's, and I hope the department can answer it, but it involves those unsecured potential PII over the next year until December of 21. And the question is about the relationship between DoIT and the department, and whether or not DoIT oversees what the department does in terms of its cybersecurity, and if not, if there is any kind of other private sector contractor that provides that kind of oversight.
Steve Jersey on the line. He's our Director of Information Systems Audits. Steve, you might know the relationship between DoIT and Mdot. Do you want to take a stab at that one?
Yes, Greg. Thank you, Senator Hester, for the question. As to the oversight relationship on DoIT with MVA, DoIT has very general, broad oversight responsibilities for all of the state agencies. but in particular into a deeper issue, such as what this particular finding related to, I think it falls back to being primary agency responsibility. I don't believe DoIT is deep into the particular agencies with oversight. In this case, this finding dealt with the PII information. That's my understanding. Perhaps MVA, when they speak, can clarify if I've misspoken.
Thank you. Can I ask one quick follow-up question?
Certainly.
How many years has this been a repeat finding related to cybersecurity and PII?
That wasn't the repeat finding.
It wasn't, okay.
The repeat finding was procurement finding number 9.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Any other questions? Chairman Krim, any questions?
No, Chair Lamb, I have none at this time.
Okay.
For the agency, but not here.
Great. So,
Chairman?
Oh.
Senator Kagan, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I just have a quick thing. I got a call from a constituent who got notification from MVA that they were dead, and they were definitely not dead. I want to give props to Administrator Nizer for being very responsive personally and fixing the issue, but I do want to flag it for OLA because I think it would, if that's another database management issue or update, whether it was a similar name or something, there was obviously an error. I don't know if there's a pattern of such a thing, but I don't know if it's something that OLA wants to speak to. Again, I want to reinforce Administrator Nizer did a great job, but it kind of shouldn't have happened in the first place. So happy to hear any answers.
I'm not sure we have an answer to that question. Mark, did we look into something like that or you test for that?
No, I think the administration could answer that. No.
Yeah, we don't test for every possible problem. I mean, we have, obviously our time is somewhat limited. Oh, this is a multi-100-day audit. So we pick and choose things to look at. And I don't think that was on our radar necessarily this time.
It would be more the opposite. If someone died, their license would eventually, if the MBA didn't become aware of it and didn't cancel, eventually their license would become renewable, and they obviously couldn't renew it. So,
Well, that would be the worst scenario, right? If
right.
the person has licenses, right?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands from committee members, so why don't we go ahead and call up the Maryland Department of Transportation. I see on the agenda that we have Secretary Slater listed first. I don't know. Oh, I see Secretary Slater now, and Administrator Nizer from MBA, as well as other folks from the Mdot and MBA team. Why don't we start with Secretary Slater?
Great, thanks so much. For the record, my name is Gregory Slater, Secretary, Maryland Department of Transportation. Thank you for inviting us here today to talk about this important topic, respond to the Office of Legislative Audit's audit report for the Maryland Department of Transportation Motor Vehicle Administration. It's my pleasure to join all of you here today. I hope everyone is well. I hope everyone is healthy. I hope everyone is staying safe. At Mdot, we are committed to delivering the governor's customer service promise of providing that premier customer service to all Marylanders, but also making sure that their information is safe and secure. And I think you're going to hear a lot about that today. Mdot MVA completes over 11 million transactions on an annual basis and plays a critical role to help maintain the supply chain and connect Maryland residents to their needs. We take responsibility for protecting the personal information of all of our customers very seriously, and we are constantly evaluating our practices and procedures to ensure that we are not only meeting security-related standards, but as practical exceeding those standards. So, I thank our legislative audit team for working with us and continuing to collaborate and working through these important efforts. Mdot MBA is currently undergoing a major IT modernization moving from a mainframe-based system to a web-based application that has many integration and multi-level security features that will help us take the security of our systems even further as we fully implement this phase 2 of our Customer Connect system next year. We appreciate the Office of Legislative Auditors and the important role that they play in ensuring that our processes and our procedures are strong and that together we protect Maryland residents. Mdot worked closely with the audit team and in many aspects addressed issues as soon as they were brought to their attention. Where more work was required, Mdot ensured that the appropriate resources were dedicated to make sure we got that work done appropriately. In addition, Mdot has a robust internal auditing plan to ensure that these issues remain in compliance going forward. I'd like to turn it over to Mdot Administrator Chrissy Nizer to address the specific findings, and then we'll both be here to address any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Secretary Slater. I appreciate that, and it is a pleasure to join all the committee members here today. For the record, my name is Chrissy Nizer. I'm the administrator at Mdot. At Mdot, we remain focused on providing that premier customer service that the Secretary talked about, but also keeping that focus on really safety and security. Those are two additional principles that are really important to us. I have to say the Office of Legislative Audits plays a really important role in that process, and I've always really respected the audit teams and their professionalism, and again, want to thank the team this time for the good work they've done. I know it was brought up earlier, and actually we are very proactive when we develop new procedures related to audit issues. We actually share those procedures with the legislative auditors. Even though they've left, we've continued to do that over the last 6 or 8 months and electronically communicating with them. So we take that, we look at it as a partnership, and we take that really seriously and think that it's important. We do have a process, as the Secretary referenced, so we will do our first follow-up audit in the new year, and then we do quarterly follow-ups, and those are conducted by our internal audit team. So they'll review all the audit findings, make sure they're still in compliance, and obviously identify if there are any issues that we need to address. We certainly recognize that the products we issue are critical not only to identity but vehicle ownership, and obviously that's something we take very seriously. So we are constantly updating our procedures because frankly there are attempts all the time that regularly change to try to get documents in an inappropriate way. And to address that, we've actually established an internal fraud working group meeting. It meets on a every other month basis. We bring all of our senior leaders together as well as our investigation team, and they bring issues to our attention so that we can more proactively address them as they come up. As Secretary Slater mentioned, we're really excited about Customer Connect, which is our new IT modernization. We're coming from a really old mainframe-based system, which some of these additional security measures that were requested are difficult to implement in that environment. The schedule of that is the first phase was actually implemented this summer in July. That second phase is scheduled to be implemented in December of 2021. So a year from now, we will be fully implemented with Customer Connect. It does have a multi-layer secure architecture and many integrated security features. Obviously, that will take us another step further in protecting our customer data and systems from any malicious attacks. I want to talk just a little bit about some of those features at a high level, and then certainly we can get into additional questions later. It has communication between various application components and make sure it's encrypted, and that encryption occurs at all levels. The data is encrypted both at rest and in motion. There's application endpoint security, granular role-based access control, so making sure people only have access to what they need. It logs every transaction and any change that's made in the system. It has a snapshot functionality that allows you to replay the entire session, the entire transaction that occurred, to take a look at that if there is a question about it. You can perform a full audit of all successful and failed logins, as well as multi-factor authentication. So we're really happy with these additional functionality that the new system will bring to the table, and we think that'll be very helpful. In addition, even prior to the legislative audit, we procured an IT consultant, that's Janus Associates. And the reason we brought them on is the exact issue we've been talking about. You know, we take the confidentiality of this information very seriously. We know we might not always have all the expertise we need. And even if we have it, we want that outside perspective to tell us that the actions we're taking are appropriate. They have reviewed the audit as well as the actions we've taken, and have determined that we are taking the necessary steps. And so again, we take that very seriously, and that's why we've gone to the extent of acquiring an RFP with an IT professional that does work in the federal sector as well as the state sector, and has been very helpful to us as well. Obviously, it's a very complex organization, as most of you know, and so we are proud of the fact that this is the smallest number of audit sites, as well as the one repeat in the last several audit cycles, but I would only be happy if it was 0, and so we still have more work to do, but certainly I'm glad to see that number decreasing. So now I'll walk specifically through the findings, starting with finding 1, and I'll begin with the issue relative to individuals getting multiple products at the same address. First of all, I just wanted to say that we do an electronic verification of all addresses through a software system called the Melissa Address Verification, which uses U.S. Postal database. That assures us that the address is valid and it's not a business address, but doesn't really give us much information beyond that. So to address the issue of individuals trying to get an address or trying to get a product at the same address. And I do want to clarify, these are non-compliant licenses. These are not Real ID licenses. And the issue there is, as again, most of you know, is that not every state issues non-compliant licenses. So individuals whose states might not issue those type of licenses for people who don't have lawful status may attempt to come to Maryland and receive that Maryland license. So we have put measures in place knowing that that is an issue. We've created what we call a bad address database, and that database is if an address has been used 15 or more times to get a product in our system. And that database was successful. It stopped 1,343 attempts of individuals to get products when there were more than 15 addresses. We also took action in canceling 523 licenses. So again, we were active in that regard. However, we were only adding...
Excuse me, Administrator Nizer. This is Delegate Krim,
Yes.
House Chair. Did you provide a written response? Because I'm not seeing that in my materials from the committee. Did you provide a written response? Because some of these statistics, it would be nice to have in writing. Thank you.
Sure. I'd be happy to provide that as follow-up. I did not provide a written response. A lot of these stats are in our response to the audit, although I have updated some of them because obviously it's been several months since the audit response, but certainly we'll do that as a follow-up and provide that to the committee staff so they can distribute it. Thank you. What we realized is that addresses were being added once they were investigated. So there are many addresses that have multiple individuals living there, whether it's a homeless shelter or halfway house, senior facility. And so we would investigate the address before we would add it to the database. And that's where some of these holes in the process the auditors identified happened. So since the conclusion of the audit, we went back, we added all the addresses that had not been put into the system. And as of the end of November, we're actually adding them as they occur. So as soon as there are 15 products issued at the same address, that evening, that address will be added to the bad address database. And so that will allow us really to stop the process altogether. You know, the team was doing a great job, but it was taking a while to determine if those addresses should be added. So now we'll be doing it proactively as soon as it hits that threshold. And we do believe that will address the issue. We do acknowledge that there were some cancellations that were not taken timely. We had some staffing shortages that have since been addressed, and all 10 licenses that needed to be canceled, that action has been taken. I'll now talk about the Social Security number duplicate issue. Again, I want to let you know that we do electronically verify Social Security numbers with the Social Security Administration. That is part of the process every time a license issued, not just a new license, but when we renew those licenses as well, we do that electronic verification. We know that, you know, we have 99% of our Social Security numbers verified, and there were only those 70 duplicates that were found out of the 4.8 million in our database, but certainly we want that number to be 0 as well, and that is the only standard that really is acceptable. So the team was working the report of duplicate Social Security numbers, and I think some of the reasons, so I just want to restate that, if somebody marries and a name change, their driver's license number changes, and that can result in it. Also, there are instances where, frankly, folks need to correct records with Social Security Administration, so that could cause some issues. And so, while it doesn't happen often, it's obviously a serious issue, and we want to make sure we're on top of it. We did have a weekly report prior to the auditors reviewing this process, but what we realized is it was not cumulative, meaning that if the team, for whatever reason, didn't work the report that week, that record would fall off, and it was not in the subsequent week's report. So since the issue was brought to our attention, we made that a cumulative report, and we're also now generating that daily, so to make sure the team is keeping up with it, and that no record falls off that report. So again, we believe that that will further strengthen a procedure that was already in place. On finding 2, in terms of convictions from out of state for driving records, again, obviously that is something we want to make sure that we have a high degree of accuracy. It is a process that is entirely manual today. One of the benefits of going to Customer Connect is that some of the processes where we can automate these functions, we are going to take advantage of that. And obviously, when we automate, we do that auditing on the back end to make sure appropriate action is taken. However, some of the errors that were determined were just simple human error in terms of processing those records. And so it is important to note during that same time frame, over 440,000 suspension actions were taken. So it just gives you a sense of the scope of the manual processes that are being undertaken on a daily basis related to these issues. Again, we enhanced that process after the issue was brought to our attention, not only with a weekly report, but also multiple supervisory reviews. Again, that is to make sure that we are catching any issues as they happen. And also create a daily report to better monitor all the convictions that are being received electronically. We did review the 1,275 out-of-state convictions that LLA indicated action was not taken on. We did take the required action and put points on those records. It was actually 767 that we had to add to. The records for the remaining 508 were either taken prior to the OLA audit or were convictions transferred from out of state as part of a driver's history. So for instance, if you transfer, impaired driving, we don't take action on that, but we pull that over as part of your driving record. It wasn't as easy to distinguish between something that was pulled from another state versus something that was an active Maryland resident that we should have taken action on. And so we are actively undergoing that supervisory review process and making sure that we are finding any issues as they occur. I do want to answer a few questions that came up related to suspensions. One is that there is no time limit for us to take action. So, when we are made aware of these suspensions, we are not prohibited from going ahead and taking the action, even if it was, a period of time before that action was taken. And so all the actions that we identified, that has been taken, and those processes move forward. In terms of specifically related to state liability, certainly someone could sue the state. We are self-insured as a state, and that would have to be reviewed in terms of whether we did our due diligence, whether the other state appropriately notified us. Again, these are all manual processes, not just in our state, but also from other states. And that's something as a motor vehicle association we're working on to be able to do that electronically. It's a new enhancement to a federal system that's being developed, a national system that I'll talk about in a minute. But this is a very manual process, and so we're looking to close those holes to the greatest extent possible. But certainly nothing would preclude a lawsuit in the case that or the example that was referenced, but we would obviously look at the specifics of that case. The good news is that all the appropriate action was taken in these circumstances, and the driver's driving records are updated appropriately. I'll now move on to finding 3. This was the issue related to supervisors not necessarily documenting appropriately when they were overrides, and whether that override was appropriate. We put out a new procedure to remind supervisors of the action that was supposed to being taken. This is another one where Customer Connect's going to add some functionality. That supervisor review, everything will be documented, from the request for the override to the review of of the override to any action that needs to be taken. I think in particular, legislative auditor was concerned that if the override was not appropriate, they wanted to see that linkage between the action that was taken as a follow-up step. So all of that will be tied together in this integrated system that we're in the process of deploying now. Finding 4 is related to notification when somebody becomes licensed in Maryland. Again, this is another one of those manual processes. So when someone gets a Maryland license, we notify other states by paper. Other states also notify us by paper. There's a new system that over the last several years has been implemented called state-to-state verification service that allows us to do that electronically. Maryland was one of the first states to join that system because of the great efficiencies that it provides. Right now, 29 states are in production with that system and 6 states are in testing. So we've got a good percentage of jurisdictions who are joining it. The issue with this particular audit site was when we joined the service, there was a misunderstanding by staff. They knew that they were getting these records now electronically, and they didn't realize there were still some jurisdictions not participating in state to state, and that we needed to continue the manual process with those jurisdictions. We've clearly updated that with staff. We went back and sent all the paper records that need to be sent to those other jurisdictions. They've all been sent, and that has been resolved. But again, we're hopeful that moving forward, less and less of the paper exchange will have to occur, and we'll do more electronically. Finding 5 is related to updating conviction information. Unfortunately, there was a backlog in the unit that is responsible for the issue or taking the action here. That backlog was addressed back in November of 2019, but it was something that was uncovered during the audit period when the auditors were here. We have taken additional steps, including making sure that we're checking the records and having supervisors go back and auditing them to make sure that they were appropriately updated. It is something also that we've raised the visibility for. So we have a monthly meeting with our senior leadership team where we go over a lot of stats and a lot of data. And so this particular issue and convictions and making sure they're being timely applied have been added to that monthly report. So not only is management and the division looking at it, but it's something that would come to my attention as well as the deputy administrator, so we can make sure that we're on top of this. And if a backlog did develop, we can make sure we're assigning resources as appropriate moving forward. Finding 6 is related to protecting that personal information. Obviously, I want to stress again, that is something we take very seriously, and we are in full compliance with the current Information Technology Security Manual and Federal Information Processing Standard. And that is according to acceptable industry standards for the protection of personal identifiable information and other sensitive data. We always look to those federal standards. We want to make sure we're in compliance. The audit reference 1,100 employees, that is out of 1,700. So I just want to be very clear that it wasn't that all of our agents had access to this information, but the 1,100, those are agents that we've reviewed need to have access to data in terms of processing the information that they do every day, whether they're issuing licenses, whether they're processing driving records, making that important suspension and conviction information is updated as well. Mdot MBA follows NIST guidelines, and we apply the least privilege principle, which means that whatever access you are assigned is based specifically on the work that you do, and the access is the least amount of access that is required in order to perform your job. In addition, the access is reviewed on a quarterly basis to make sure that your access is still appropriate. Has your job duty changed? Is there something that we should be reviewing to change? The guidance provided in the State of Maryland Information Technology Security Manual, and I know there were some questions about DUIT, and some of these documents I'm referencing are related to those standards regarding de-identification of PII or the sensitive data applies when controlled disclosure is authorized outside of the system, not within the system. The Information Technology Security Manual has no provision or requirement that sensitive data be masked or truncated when in the process inside your system. As was mentioned earlier, it is cost prohibitive to implement a system as part or solution as part of our legacy system. especially considering the close time frame that we'll be implementing the new system in December of 2021. However, I do want to emphasize that we've put some controlling measures in place, and this is something, again, that we worked with the legislative auditors on, and they were satisfied with this idea. So we've added a new report that is generated on a weekly and also looked at on a daily basis of any agent who is producing or doing more transactions than the norm. So in other words, if the average number of transactions is 75 and we see somebody doing 200, clearly that's an issue that should be investigated, right? So this is a new report that we just implemented at the beginning of November. We've already gone through a cycle of it. And so what happens is the internal auditing division gets that report. They then communicate to the branch managers. They investigate to see what was going on. Is there a reason the number of transactions was a little high? So I want to reassure the committee that we are not just leaving status quo until we implement in December of 21. We've implemented this as a stopgap provision so that we can assure everybody that we're doing everything possible to still provide our agents with the information they need to perform their job, but also provide that sense of protection of that information as well. Obviously, as we move forward in implementing the new system, we'll be happy to work with the legislative auditors, but we are looking at that masking provision that was really important to them, and that, so that only the last 4 digits of the social will be seen. Obviously, there's some exceptions to that. When you're issuing a new license, you have to enter that information in, and there's some times where you may need to see it, but everywhere else, that information will be masked, and that's something that we can do under many of the provisions I mentioned with Customer Connect. Finding 7 was related to the version of McAfee that we were under. And again, I want to stress that we have always been on current and supported versions of malware protection. We do abide by the Do It Information Security Technology Security Manual. Again, in this regard, there's no specific timeline requirements specified in that manual, only the agencies be on supported software and the information be automatically updated. The information systems be automatically updated to include that protection mechanism as new versions come out. So Mdot has always been on current and supported software versions. We were during the audit as well. Also, Mdot automatically updates security definition DAT files on a daily basis. As malware is discovered, the DAT file is updated to include the signature so the application can identify it and prevent that infection. Again, at Mdot, that happens on a daily basis. And so Do It's guideline is the version of malware protection software employed be currently supported and no more than 2 versions before the most current available version. Again, we were in compliance with that. There were some issues related to the most recent version of McAfee related to Windows that were being worked through, which is why it was not automatically implemented. There are also, obviously, with a network the size of Mdot, that's something that does take time and has to be implemented in a way that doesn't cause other ramifications throughout the system. But again, there are many other measures in place. The malware protection is really only one of many layers of protection. Most malware attacks directed towards Mdot are caught at the perimeter by intrusion detection or intrusion prevention systems before they even reach our servers or our workstations. As a result, Mdot MBA's servers and managed computers have been and continue to be protected to the fullest extent possible. Obviously, we move to updated versions as quickly as we possibly can, but we also want to do it as safely as we possibly can. Finding 8 was related to our IT contracts and detailed records related to vendor billing that was provided. We've taken the issue of contract management very seriously as a department and identified the need to improve, record keeping and actions that are being taken. Mdot as a whole developed a 40-hour contract management class. Nearly 20 MBA employees have already completed that class, with 5 more scheduled to be completed in the next year. So we're really committed to trying to do a better job of record keeping and making sure that we're closely watching all of these contracts and only signing off on billing when appropriate. And so we believe the new procedures that have been put in place, as well as the training, I think in many cases is more an issue of folks not understanding everything they need to look for and everything that needs to be part of the process. And now for finding 9, this is the only repeat finding, and I do want to emphasize that The finding was not ignored at all. We take these findings very seriously. Unfortunately, it was a misunderstanding. So the team believed that the requirement related to having that password protection and the procedures in place was related to RFPs and not PORFs, because purchase order requests for proposals are obviously a secondary competition. And so they didn't realize that the same measures needed to be in place for those type of procurements. And so as soon as the issue was brought to our attention, we updated a procedure. Again, that procedure was shared with the legislative auditors and they signed off on the procedure. And so we will always make sure that we are taking the appropriate steps related to protecting those bids as they're coming in as well. And having 2 employees review it as well when they're electronic. So that concludes what I wanted to provide related to the audit sites. I will take a minute, if you don't mind, and just address the issue that Senator Kagan brought up, just to explain to everybody exactly what happened there. We do receive a file from the Department of Health, from Vital Records more specifically. On a monthly basis, we get that file for anybody who dies in Maryland. We update our records with a deceased indicator. Unfortunately, in this case, this gentleman's wife had passed away, and so his vehicle was updated with that deceased indicator. And when the letter was generated, the letter indicated that he was the deceased individual, which really was an employee error. His record was never marked deceased. It was because he had a joint ownership vehicle with his spouse. So what we've done is we've looked at the process. We had the team updating the letter. I think that was part of the problem. The letter was not as clear as it could have been. And then also I've asked them to look at what processes need to be in place in terms of just auditing a certain percentage of that outgoing correspondence. Obviously, I felt very bad that this person's spouse had died, and then we sent him a letter indicating that he's deceased. It was a very unfortunate circumstance, but I do really appreciate Senator Kagan bringing it to my attention, because that's how we can try to address these issues and make the process better in the future, which is really what our focus always is. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that the committee members may have.
Sure. Thank you, Administrator Neiser. I see other folks that are listed here on the agenda with you. Are they just supporting staff for you, or do they need to speak as well?
Yeah, those are our IT director, as well as the CIO and the security officer for Mdot. They're here in case there are more technical questions. They're certainly more in tune with those requirements than myself, and they're just here for questions. So happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, great. So I saw that Senator Kramer had his hand up first and for a while, and then I'll pass along to Chairman Krim, and we can maybe alternate House and Senate questions. Senator Kramer?
Yeah, thank you for that, Mr. Chair. I just want to say, first of all, I very much appreciate the thorough audit report that we received and the very thorough response from Administrator Neiser to that audit. And I just want to take advantage of this forum to extend my sincere thanks to both Secretary Slater and Administrator Neiser for the incredibly good work that they are both doing. It's rare that a week goes by that I don't have a constituent with a concern that does involve something that deals with transportation or the Motor Vehicle Administration. And that's not surprising in a state of 6.5 million people. But what I have consistently learned is that both Secretary Slater, who, by the way, stepped into a pile pandemic upon becoming secretary, as well as the debacle that is the Purple Line, and he has done a phenomenal job trying his very best to keep that on track. Once again, something else he stepped into and has really stepped up to the plate on the issue. But Secretary Slater and Administrator Neiser clearly have embraced the notion that we are all working on the same team for the residents of the state. And I know that when I reach out to either one of them with a constituent concern, the response is consistently immediate and resolved. So for that, I want to say thank you to both of you. It's not an easy job that either of you are doing, and I don't envy you it. But thank you both very much for all that you do to help support those of us in the legislature in our dealings with our constituents. I just want to say that, and that's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. The first delegate with a question today is Delegate Valentino Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too want to take the opportunity to echo the sentiments of the distinguished senator from Montgomery County, because each time that I have had to deal with MVA during this pandemic, the response from Secretary Slater and Ms. Nizer has been extraordinary. And I had a small business, a transportation company that was, really suffering in the pandemic. They had relinquished a lot of their vehicles and their licenses. And ultimately, there was a weekend where they were going to get a lot of business and try and help their small business and employees. And the Secretary and Ms. Nizer didn't hesitate to immediately respond and help this small business. So I do think it's important that that I echo the senator from Montgomery County's reflections on how stellar the department is. Secretary Slater, please let the artist of the artwork know behind you that I really appreciate the picture and would like to commend them for artwork for my office. And then just one question, Madam Chair. So Ms. Nizer, when you were talking about the issuance of non-real ID in the state, and that a lot of states, we've moved into this real ID situation, but Maryland offers an alternative to that, and that we had a lot of applications. Do you sense that we have a pervasive problem with fraudulent applications in that area? Or is there a way to look at the trending of those type of applications here in Maryland compared to our surrounding jurisdictions?
I think that's a really good question, Delegate. What's happened is that some of our surrounding states are now issuing those non-compliant licenses. So if you look at it, Delaware issues those licenses, DC now issues those non-compliant. And when I say non-compliant, just so I'm clear, it's for people that are not lawfully present in the United States so that they have an opportunity to get that driver's license or ID card. In fact, Virginia is going to start issuing one of those products as well, January 2nd of next year. And so I think as our surrounding states, New York started, as well as New Jersey issuing those products. So I think the states that we were seeing people come from because their home jurisdiction didn't provide an option are now providing an option for them. And with that, the number of people attempting to get products here in Maryland will decrease.
So I don't have a problem with the need for the issuance of it. Obviously, I just wanted to know if we had disproportionate fraudulent applications. So thank you.
Yeah, and in talking to jurisdictions, it seems like our fraud is in line with what other jurisdictions see in this regard. Address fraud is I want to say it's an easier kind of fraud because those documents that with scanners and printers these days, with a good printer, you can easily replicate, a utility bill or a phone bill or something like that, versus a birth certificate, a social security card. Those documents, passport, those are really hard to fraudulently create. People do it, don't get me wrong, but it's much more difficult. And so, in talking to our fellow jurisdictions, we share best practices about fraud. And I think we're in a similar situation to many other jurisdictions, but certainly something we always try to continue to put additional measures in place for.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Secretary Ms. Nizer, for your commitment to us and the people of Maryland.
Thank you.
I thought I saw Senator McCray had his hand up before, but it doesn't look like it's up anymore. Do you still want to?
Yeah, somebody took my hand down. I'm not sure who that was, but it wasn't me.
Okay. Well, we wouldn't want to do that.
You know what?
So
I just got a private message of who did take my hand down. So, but I guess I need to start off with Senator Kramer and Senator Valentino Smith by sending many accolades to Secretary Slater and Administrator Nizer. I do agree that they are very accessible and they are very responsive. Administrator Nizer, my questions are in reference to finding number 2 and finding number 5. For finding number 2, it looked like it was a number of serious issues that folks could get points for, such as manslaughter, DUI, felony while driving. They talked about 1,100 plus of these people being on the street. They talked about that garnering 1,275 convictions. Could you speak to how many of those folks out of the 1,100 plus should not have been on the road if it caused any type of fatal accidents? whether that resulted in injury or death while those folks were on the road. And I say that because it looked like a number of them had substance abuse issues, and we may have been enabling their substance abuse issues by not getting them off the road. To speak to finding number 5, I think that Chairwoman Krim raises a very, very good, valid issue. She asked in reference to the response, and the response that I had gotten is dated back in the month of September. So you may have a better outlook now that it's the month of December to tell us how are you coming along with that backlog. In the response of September, it stated that it was in totality over 121,000 people that this could be, and they only sampled 21, but found that 7 of those 21 had some form of points. So I wasn't sure how many of those folks should be off the roads or how serious that is. It didn't say that they had serious issues, but when you send Chairwoman Krim the response, if you could just make sure that so I can take a second look at what you've done since up until this month of December. Thank you, and I'll look forward to your responses.
Thank you, Senator McCray. And yeah, certainly those are both serious issues. I will say out of the 1,275 out-of-state convictions that the OLA identified, there were really only actions that need to be taken on 764. That's because the remaining 508, we had already taken that action prior to when they were reviewing that record, or they came in when somebody came from out of state. So it's again a circumstance where somebody moves from Virginia, they have a serious, like a DUI conviction on their record. We apply that to their Maryland record. We don't take points on it or suspension action. That action was already taken in Virginia, but if it's within the relevant time frame, we need to make sure we take it so that we know if they have subsequent violations that is a multiple offender. So many of those didn't need to necessarily be taken. The 767 did need to be taken, and that action was immediately taken. We were not aware of any in looking at those records. We did not identify any that involved a fatal crash or anything like that we're aware of. And so, we're glad certainly that is the case, but certainly, your comments point to the seriousness and why we take these very seriously. Again, making sure that we have that additional supervisor review, making sure we have those enhanced reports will help in the short term, and then automating that process as we move forward with a new system, I think that will help as well. And then related to the finding 5, that backlog was actually addressed back in November of 2019. So we do not have a backlog. Obviously, we still get records coming in, and we're taking that action as they do come in. But the process, unfortunately, we had some staff shortages and a supervisor who wasn't there. So we didn't have really people that were paying the focus attention they needed to be on that issue. And that's the one where I referenced that we've put additional monitoring mechanisms in place. So I'm looking at that data on a monthly basis because I never want there to be a backlog. If there is a backlog, let's assign additional resources so we get that backlog down. Those are issues that are critical when they relate to people's driving records. And certainly, as also the highway safety representative for the governor, I take these issues very seriously. And impaired driving is one area I've been incredibly active in, and certainly don't want to allow anybody to be on the road who should not be on the road, putting the rest of our drivers at risk. So that action backlog was eliminated back in November 19, but certainly it was during the audit period. And so a legitimate issue to be identified by the OLA. And I think those additional measures we have in place to make sure it stays that way will help us going forward. But again, I appreciate the question and certainly recognize the significance of these issues.
Thank you, Madam Administrator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McCray. And for the record, I would never take your hand down, for sure. Okay, the next delegate for a question is Delegate Ahrens.
Thank you. First of all, Secretary Slater, Mr. Nizer, thank you very much for being here. I guess Senator McCray kind of covered a lot of what I was going on. I'm hopeful that this new system is really going to be part of the answer. But just to throw kudos out there, I do appreciate, Greg, I think you'll understand this, with the pandemic, we haven't had as much conversation as we had in the past, but I do appreciate all you're doing. And I think we're really remiss if we don't start talking about some of the people that you guys have working for you. On this Eastern Shore, we've been blessed. It's been phenomenal. Not only are you guys doing a great job, but I think they deserve some credit over there too. But thank you for all you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. And Mr. Chairman, I have a question now that I think all the other questions are done.
Go ahead.
Again, I will say what all the other members of this committee are saying, that you're doing a wonderful job, and always appreciate the response we get from the Maryland Department of Transportation on a number of things. But one thing that I do want to talk about is you spoke in your testimony, Administrator, that you have an internal audit. And you said that they would be looking at all these issues coming up in their next audit, which I think you said is the beginning of 2021.
That's right.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if they could review your staff resources, because from your testimony, it appears that you think that most of these issues can be resolved by updating computer programming, etc. But I think that we also need to have some backup from the staff, especially on these issues that Senator McCray has brought up and Delegate Ahrens. I mean, these things are life and death. And the first priority for Mdot is public safety and making sure our highway is safe. I can see the Secretary is nodding his head. Yes, we hear this every year in appropriations from Mdot. This is your first priority. So I think in order to make sure that we are being as safe as possible in the public sector, we need to have some backup to make sure that this is taken care of. So I'm asking if you could have your auditors look at that staffing level to make sure that we can comply with everything, all the information we're getting from other states, and make sure that those entries are made on Maryland licenses. And Mr. Chairman, that's all I have.
Oh, thank you, Delegate Krim, and we'd be happy to do that. I think that is important. And I will say that's something that our senior leadership team has already started to look at. As we're evolving as an organization and doing more things electronically, how should we be staffed so that we're staffed appropriately and supporting these areas that are really critical to our function? So that's something we've already started, but certainly we can bring in our audit team as part of that review. And you know, I think a few of you referenced it, and it gives me an opportunity to really talk about the heroes, our employees who have been doing stellar work during this pandemic. And I'd be remiss if I didn't once again talk about that. You know, it's tough work that they're doing, whether they're on the front lines or behind the scenes doing this important work like related to convictions and suspensions. And so I just, I can't give them enough kudos for the good work they're doing, and certainly we'll complete that review and make sure we provide information about that.
And just one thing, do you share that internal audit?
So they are public documents. Certainly we provided to the auditors when they came in. That is one of the first things they ask for, is a copy of all the internal audits that were conducted. And so we share that with the auditors when they come to do their review with us. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I just want to echo Chairperson Krim's remarks too, you know, and about the staffing issue. So I share some of those concerns and would appreciate, I think, to her earlier request, if you can get us a written response too. I think that would be really helpful, just so that we have that for the record. I know committee staff has also pointed out that there were folks in the chat in Zoom that were also sharing accolades to MVA, but I don't think everyone can see that. So just wanted to let the committee folks know, if you are sharing that, they won't be able to see that, but wanted to convey that to the agency as well. And thank you, Secretary Slater, for being here. I know you've been working closely with us on the BWI airport noise. Appreciate your support with that. We will continue to follow up with that as well, because we're still working on that too. So with that, anything else to add from either of the two of you?
Just two things. I just want to take a minute and thank the Joint Audit and Evaluation Committee for having us here today. Thank the Office of Legislative Audits. You know, all of us in this partnership, we can't do this without our partnership and these checks and balances and this collaboration. So I look forward to continuing that. And then the last thing I'll do is echo Administrator Neiser's comments for all of the men and women of Mdot and frankly, our extended family as well, who've done an amazing job during this pandemic and a very challenging situation that goes from our men and women over at the MBA to our men and women working down the docks at the Port of Baltimore, our TSA agents, our men and women of BWI Marshall, our incident response folks, our transit operators, everybody have just frankly shown up every day and delivered for Maryland. And so I never miss an opportunity to thank them.
Great, thank you. If there's nothing else, we appreciate your time here. I know you have a lot going on at the department and the agency as well, so thank you for being here. There's nothing else for the two of you. We can move to the next part of the agenda, and I believe Mr. Hook will come back on to talk about the next audit of the State Department of Assessments and Taxation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would add about the administrator. That was a dynamic presentation, and clearly she gets audits. And if she's ever looking for a job, I could probably find a position for her up at OLA. So just, she's probably signed off, but you know, I'm always looking for good people. So I have a lot of them right now, but I'm always looking for good people. With that, the second fiscal compliance audit to be presented is the October 2020 report on the State Department of Assessments and Taxation, or DAT. With me today is OLA's newlywed audit manager, Adam Westover, and Joe McWilliams, who manages OLA's expanded and renamed fraud investigation unit. Adam and Joe will present the detailed report findings at the conclusion of my introductory comments. This report also contains 9 findings, which span 6 different functional areas. 2 findings cover the need to complete real property assessments and ensure that all assessment appeals were properly reviewed and approved. There were also 2 findings in the homeowner's tax credit section, which dealt with certain calculations that were either not performed correctly or were not timely audited. In this group is finding 5 that resulted from a tip to OLA's fraud, waste, and abuse hotline, and which did receive some news coverage as it relates to improperly calculated income tax offset tax credits, primarily affecting Montgomery County residents. Joe will walk you through that particular finding as was developed by the OLA Fraud Investigation Unit. Finally, there is a payroll audit finding on an administrative leave payout that was in excess of the 10-day limit in state regulations. During the audit, DAT cited executive privilege, and in its report response would not provide a justification or rationale for the payout, claiming that the matter was outside the scope of the audit. We did recently confer with legal counsel to the Maryland General Assembly on the matter of executive privilege in this instance, and counsel does not believe that executive privilege extends to DAT, but needs to be asserted by the governor to be exempt from disclosure to OLA. Therefore, we will pursue this matter with DAT during the normal audit report follow-up process, but with that knowledge, the committee may not want to wait for that follow-up process to play out and may wish to delve into the finding today with DAT. With that, I will now turn it over to Adam and Joe.
Thank you, committee members, for the opportunity to address the committee about our recent fiscal compliance audit of the State Department of Assessments and Taxation. As Greg said, my name is Adam Westover, and yes, I did recently get married this past summer. Thanks, Greg. I was the audit manager for the fiscal compliance portion of the audit. With me virtually, as Greg said, is Joe McWilliams. Joe worked on findings 5 and 8 in the report, and Joe will discuss finding 5 in detail later. The 2 other senior auditors who worked on the other fiscal compliance findings are also with us. They are Nathan Suffin and Mark Katz. Also with us is the Information Systems Audit Manager, Brendan Coffey, and our IT Systems Audit Director, Steve Jersey. Next slide, please. As indicated on slide 2, the report had 9 findings, of which 3 are repeat findings from our previous audit report. It should be noted that this was an improvement from the previous audit report that had 5 repeat findings. DAT is responsible for a number of functions such as real property and personal property assessments and providing tax credits to homeowners and renters. Next slide, please. The key findings in the report are on slide 3. I will discuss these findings in more detail. Next slide, please. The first finding of the report is related to real property assessments and is discussed on slide 4. Real property is assessed once every 3 years by assessors in the 24 local assessment offices. During the 2008 legislative session, a bill was passed that eliminated the requirement for DAT to physically inspect all properties to determine the assessed value. There are still situations in which a physical inspection is still required, such as establishing the initial value of a property, or for existing properties with improvements expected to add at least $100,000 to the value of the property. Because the law change removed the requirement for all properties to be inspected, we focused on the procedures for those properties that are still required to have an inspection. Our audit found that DAT did not have procedures to ensure the 24 local assessment offices properly coded building permits in DAT's automated system. Although DAT area supervisors monitored local supervisors to ensure permits were reviewed, they did not ensure the reviews were comprehensive. We noted residential and commercial building permits totaling $338 million that were not properly coded. Based on the values of these permits, they should have been coded as new construction to ensure they were subject to the required inspections and have assessed values updated if needed. There was no reason recorded as to why these were not coded as new construction in DAT's automated system. DAT was not aware that 2 local offices did not obtain or record construction project costs in DAT's automated system. This is important to ensure properties needing inspection are inspected. These 2 offices accounted for approximately 13% of the total statewide assessable tax base for the tax year beginning July 1st, 2019. DAT did not always conduct periodic inspections of construction projects that were ongoing for extended periods of time to determine if they were complete and in need of reassessment. For example, one permit issued in October 2017 had no inspections as of July 2019, even though our research noted the project appeared substantially complete in August 2018. Next slide, please. Finding 2 of the report is discussed on slide 5. The second finding relates to real property assessment appeals. A homeowner can appeal their real property assessment first through their local assessment office. If they are not happy with the results, they can appeal to the Maryland Property Tax Appeals Board. Finally, they can appeal a decision after that to the Maryland Tax Court. We noted DAT did not use available output reports to ensure all appeals recorded in its automated system were subject to an independent review and approval. DAT relied on assessors to advise them when an appeal was recorded instead of an output report. During fiscal year 2018, 31,000 accounts had an appeal recorded in DAT's automated system. Next slide, please. Finding 3 of the report related to personal property and is on slide 6, I'm sorry. This is a repeat finding from our previous audit. DAT certifies the value of business-owned personal property based on the personal property returns filed by specific entities as required by state law. The returns are due by April 15th, and there is generally a $300 filing fee. DAT certifies the values to the 24 local subdivisions whom use these values to determine personal property taxes owed. DAT did not review comptroller records of entities receiving payments from the state and or having an active sales account to identify non-registered entities that were conducting business in the state. DAT did not investigate returns with significant fluctuations or variances in reported property from previous years to identify discrepancies. DAT runs reports to identify high-risk returns to review. We reviewed 17 returns noted as high risk and noted 6 did not have a supervisor review. DAT did not have a comprehensive process to ensure the propriety of exemptions from personal property assessments and filing fees. There can be exemptions from paying personal property taxes as stated in state law. For example, property related to charitable or educational purposes. These are approved by DAT. There are also exemptions from fees based on the business entity type, such as a sole proprietorship. We noted reviews of existing exemptions from personal property taxes was done from a log of initial exemptions applications and not a system output report. In addition, DAT did not review supporting documentation such as proof of nonprofit status to verify the propriety of business codes assigned to entities. These codes determine if filing fees are required. Finally, for finding 3, we noted DAT did not pursue penalties provided by state regulations for untimely submission of personal property returns. As of May 2019, 2,354 accounts with late filing penalties delinquent for 3 to 17 months and totaling $184,000 had not been referred to the state central collection unit. Next slide, please. On slide 7 is the 4th finding from the report related to the homeowner's tax credit. This was a repeat finding from our previous audit report. Homeowners tax credits are awarded to homeowners with a combined income up to $60,000. A credit is issued against the homeowner's tax bill when the property taxes exceed a fixed percentage of the household's gross income. DAT processes applications, determines the amount of the credit, and notifies local jurisdictions which issue the credit on the tax bill or as refunds. DAT did not perform timely audits of homeowners tax credit applications. DAT did not conduct random audits of applications since 2009. DAT also runs reports to identify discrepancies and fluctuations in applicant reported income. One report identifies discrepancies between income on the application and the state income tax return. Another report shows significant fluctuations in applicant income from the previous year. DAT had not audited the homeowners tax credit application discrepancies between the application and the tax return since 2014. These audits are important because awarded tax credits are not subject to independent review and approval at the time of processing. DAT is no longer reviewing reports of redeemed tax credits prepared by local jurisdictions to ensure they were proper due to resource limitations effective March 2019. Prior to this date, 9 jurisdictions did not submit some or all of the monthly reports. DAT did not ensure that the local jurisdictions submitted requests for reimbursement for redeemed tax credits to DAT as required by state law. Instead, local jurisdictions submitted reimbursement requests directly to the comptroller for payment without DAT first certifying to the comptroller that the requested reimbursement was due to the jurisdiction as required by law. DAT did not have procedures to ensure local jurisdictions recovered and remitted tax credits when homeowners transferred their property during the year. Local jurisdictions are responsible for recovering the tax credits and forwarding them to DAT. DAT did not have a process to ensure the adequacy of the local jurisdiction's collection efforts and the completeness of the amounts submitted to DAT. Next slide, please. Finding 5 of the report is on slide 8. Joe is going to discuss this finding.
Thank you, Adam. Again, my name is Joe McWilliams. I'm the Fraud Investigation Manager in charge of OLA's Fraud Investigation Unit. And I'll be discussing finding 5 of our audit report. This finding describes the results of our investigation into an allegation received through our fraud hotline regarding HTCs that were improperly reduced for certain homeowners. For some background, the majority of HTCs are automatically calculated by DAT's automated system. But there are some circumstances when HTCs are calculated manually by DAT employees, such as when a homeowner just purchased a new home and the credit has to be prorated. Our review identified issues with both methods of calculation, resulting in improper reductions of HTCs awarded to homeowners in Baltimore City and Montgomery County, totaling $4.4 million in fiscal year 2019. The majority of this $4.4 million related to Montgomery County. And that's because DAT's automated system was improperly programmed to deduct a separate credit administered by Montgomery County for the homeowner's property tax liabilities. To illustrate how this works, let's say a 30-year-old homeowner had a state and county property tax liability of $2,000. Depending on other factors such as income level, this homeowner should receive an HTC up to $2,000. Unfortunately, due to the way DAT's automated system calculated the HTC, that wasn't the case. Instead of using the total state and county property tax liability in its calculation, DAT was reducing it by the amount of the other credit administered by Montgomery County. So in this example, the homeowner's $2,000 credit would have been reduced by $692, leaving them with a credit of about $1,300. We couldn't readily determine the amount of improper HTC reductions for years prior to 2019, but we did find that DAT had improperly calculated the credits dating back to at least 2005. We also noted similar issues with the manually calculated credits that were done by DAT employees for 13 homeowners in Montgomery County and Baltimore City. The credits for these 13 homeowners were improperly reduced by $6,500. It's important to note that DAT had received advice from its legal counsel in January 2019 that its HTC calculation methodology wasn't proper. However, DAT had not corrected the programming language in its automated system for Montgomery County, and its employees continued to manually calculate the HTCs improperly. I also want to point out that DAT's response to our audit report indicated it did not think the prior year calculations were incorrect because they were consistent with DAT's practice at the time and upheld by Maryland's Property Tax Assessment Appeals Board and Maryland Tax Court decisions. However, this statement is not consistent with DAT's position during our audit fieldwork and after our audit when we discussed the finding with DAT management. This statement is also questionable since our assessment that the calculation was improper was consistent with the advice DAT's legal counsel provided. Finally, DAT's audit report response also stated that because it did not think the prior year calculations were incorrect, it did not plan to compensate homeowners for prior year tax credits. That concludes my comments on finding 5. I'll turn it back to Adam for the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, Joe. Next slide, please. On slide 9 is a payroll finding related to administrative leave. DAT awarded $55,000 in paid administrative leave over 5 months to a senior management employee without any documentation. This was in excess of the 10 days allowed by state regulations. The employee was hired by DAT in late March 2019. The employee was placed on paid administrative leave in early May 2019. They remained on administrative leave through most of September 2019. Since this employee was hired in late March, this means that the individual was at SDAT for about 6 weeks, then was on paid administrative leave for 5 months. Senior management would not provide us with an explanation for the leave, claiming executive privilege. DAT did not dispute the facts in our report, but disagreed with the finding, claiming this was outside the scope and timeframe of the audit. Personnel matters are within the scope of our audits, and OLA cannot ignore significant events which occur after our audit period end date, but prior to report issuance, which is explained in the audit scope, objective, and methodology section of our report. Next slide, please. The remaining 3 findings, which are 7, 8, and 9 in the report, are on slide 10. Findings 7 and 8 were cash receipt findings. DAT did not have adequate controls to ensure collections were properly accounted for and deposited timely. DAT did not perform an independent supervisory review of corporate charter transactions to ensure the proper fees were charged. We received a referral from the Fraud, Waste, and Abuse Hotline relating to the collection of expedited processing fees. We noted expedited processing fees for 3,277 documents were not collected. Finding 9 was related to DAT's information system security control. DAT procedures for logging and monitoring critical database and mainframe security events was not sufficient. This was a repeat finding from our previous audit report. Next slide, please. Our conclusions are on slide 11. I would like to thank DAT for their cooperation during the audit. Thanks again for the committee's time, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you to the audit team and to Mr. Hook. Any questions from the committee? Let me see if there are any hands raised. I see Senator Kramer pointing up a finger. Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. It was easier just to put my hand up physically than the one on the Zoom chat. Mr. McWilliams, quick question, and I don't know whether you can opine on the issue or not, but with regard to the referenced homeowners tax credit and the fact that DAT is not going to go back and address the fact that they shortchanged taxpayers for years based on their miscalculations and the fact that, you know, on the one hand, their own counsel says you're doing it wrong, and then they come back and say, well, we're doing it right. We're not really doing it wrong. And then now they've decided they were doing it wrong. Can you opine at all as to this circumstance that they are not looking at making people whole, the taxpayers whole, that did not receive the tax credit as they should have? And it sounds like, and please share with me, was it exclusively Montgomery County and Baltimore City that the audit looked at? How did it come about that these 2 particular jurisdictions were the ones you reference?
So the allegation pertained solely to Montgomery County. However, we expanded our review to include 9 other jurisdictions. The issue related to credits that were offered by these jurisdictions. The SDAT, when calculating the HDC, would take this other credit from this jurisdiction and reduce the tax liability of those homeowners. We only identified the issues with Montgomery County and Baltimore City, and when it comes to the automated system, it was only Montgomery County that we had identified issues. We did look at a couple other counties and didn't identify problems with those. Now, as far as DAT's position on making the homeowners whole for the prior years, I think that would be a great question for DAT when they present.
Okay, thank you.
Chairperson Krim, any questions, or you want to call the next person? I think you're muted. Delegate Krim, I think you're muted.
So on findings,
There we go.
where the DAT cited executive privilege, was there any follow-up with the AG or on that to see whether or not that executive privilege was properly used in that particular case?
During the audit, they cited executive privilege, but then when it came time for the official response to the audit report, they declined to provide any information, citing that the finding and the transactions occurred outside of the audit period. And of course, OLA has jurisdiction and can review any matter at any time that we don't have to wait for an audit. I could have just as easily undertaken a concurrent special review on this matter and issued a special report. And I just took the expedient of putting it in the audit report for DAT. So their official response did not cite executive privilege. That was during the course of the audit. Subsequent to the audit, we have contacted Chief Legal Counsel to the Maryland General Assembly, and she did advise us that in this case, executive privilege is inappropriate to cite because DAT cannot do that. Only the governor would have to assert executive privilege. So as part of the normal audit process, OLA will follow up through a correspondence file and through letters with agencies to obtain clarification on responses to make sure there's absolute agreement. And so we have not started that process yet, and we're going to start that after this hearing. So depending upon what comes out at the hearing and what DAT's position is at this hearing, that will impact how we pursue this as part of the follow-up process. But my point would be that given the fact that legal counsel has said that that is not, executive privilege is not in fact appropriate in this case, I would think the committee could ask DAT for information on that matter today. Start the ball rolling, so to speak.
Okay, thank you. And Chair Lamb, there is no delegates with a question. There are no delegates.
Okay, Senator McCray has his hand up. Senator McCray.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I have the same line of questioning from my good friend over in Montgomery County, Senator Kramer, because obviously we were the two jurisdictions that were impacted. But if OLA, Mr. McWilliams or Director Hooks, if you could speak to, obviously we see that SDAT disagrees. I believe that you all have an opinion, but obviously you're OLA, so I won't ask you your opinion. But can you speak to any threats or in the risk assessment? Anyone have brought a lawsuits or anything out there against the state because of the actions that were taken, or if there was something that's actually in the court because of they feel like they should be justly paid? Has that taken place, or have you all heard any of that taking place at the moment?
I have not heard anything of any kind of class action lawsuit or anything from residents in Baltimore City or Montgomery County. Joe, I mean, we kind of monitor the press looking for, obviously, items that relate to the audit findings. Joe, have you seen anything of that nature?
No, I have not.
Thank you.
Any further questions, Senator McCray? No. Okay. I just had a few of my own. I think I am concerned about this finding number 6 with the payroll finding. I find it disturbing, particularly given the current budget challenges that we have because of the COVID pandemic, of expenses like this that really should not have happened and were really uncovered as part of this audit. It sounds like, Mr. Hook, that you know, there's been some communication with the department. Has there been any written response provided to this audit to you?
Oh, except for the written response included in the audit report. That's the official response we've received so far. And that's an appendix to the actual audit report, which I believe you all have, hopefully have copies of. But we will start a formal follow-up process very shortly with them to try to obtain additional clarification.
And how did you come across finding 6? What initiated that process?
I think the employee, and Adam, jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that the employee in question was there when the audit began. And I think we even had been introduced to the employee. And then as the audit progressed, the employee was no longer there. And I think we made some inquiries, and that's pretty much how it just kind of fell into our lap. Adam, is that what happened?
Yes, correct. That's correct. The employee started in late March 2019. We had our formal audit entrance meeting in early April. He was at, or they were at our meeting. And then over the weeks and months, we noticed they were no longer coming to work because their office was down the hallway from where we were at. So we would look in the state personnel system to kind of see, you know, was he filling out time sheets, and how was his time accounted for? And that's when we saw administrative leave was used on a lot of timesheets after the May 2019 period. And then that's when we started asking more questions about what was going on.
So given that you had met with this person was a high-ranking person within the agency then, right? This was not kind of a mid-manager or lower-tier person. This came across because you had actually initially met with them while you were initiating the audit.
Correct. This was a senior management employee.
Okay. And it sounds like the department asserted executive privilege as part of this. Obviously, you had brought that up. Delegate Krim had brought that up as well. How often has executive privilege been claimed in these types of audits that you conduct, Mr. Hook?
I can recall it being discussed once before with an audit in a different agency several years ago, but it is very rare. I can say that with certainty. It is very, very rare. I'll add another very in front. Yeah, very, very rare.
So it almost never happens.
Correct.
Okay. And according to the audit, state regulations limit administrative leave to 10 days. Is this a categorical limit, or is there a process to have more than 10 days approved?
COMAR, the language in COMAR spells out how it's, what are the conditions for awarding it? And it does say not to exceed 10 work days. But then at the end, the last regulation in this particular section of COMAR does say administrative leave may be authorized by the secretary, and that secretary is the Secretary of Department of Budget and Management, for any other reasons which are consistently applied and which are not illegal or unconstitutional. I don't know if that applies to the number of days or other reasons for awarding administrative leave. But in any case, there was no approval from the Department of Budget and Management Secretary for any extension beyond the 10 days in this case, or at least we were not provided any. And I certainly don't think it was consistently applied in this case, because I think, as Adam said, someone works several weeks and then receives administrative leave for 10 times the number of weeks they work. Wouldn't seem you could consistently apply that across all the state agencies. So.
Right. So just to be clear, this individual worked for just over a month, but received 5 months of pay, right?
I believe that's correct.
Okay. So I obviously have some concerns about this, and I would like to hear what the agency has to say about this and what position this is. If the agency is not willing to let us know what position this is, just the position title, is that something OLA can provide to the committee?
Our State Government Article 2-1226, our confidentiality statute, it does allow me to share information obtained during the audit with the committee to help the committee understand an audit report. I'm not sure I want to do that in a public setting, but I certainly can provide more information to the committee if the department, if DAT themselves are not forthcoming with the information today.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Any further questions? I see Delegate yeah, go ahead. Yep.
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick question on this is when we have something like executive privilege, I guess initiated, isn't there a process within the state that has to go through multiple approvals? I'm concerned that this is coming out how many months later after an audit, that this wasn't addressed immediately and there had to be other people held accountable for something like this. This would seem to be an anomaly to me. That why would we allow it to continue?
Well, I mean, they cited that during the course of the audit for the reason not to provide the information. In the official response, and so that was basically their unofficial position, because their official position is the response to the written audit report. And in their response to the audit report, they did not cite executive privilege. They cited the fact that the transactions occurred outside of the audit period and therefore were not within the purview of the audit. That was their official argument in the written report response.
But I guess my comment was more, once somebody says the word executive privilege, I would think that starts some other arm moving.
The problem, Delegate, is we can't, it's hard to compel agencies. Most agencies cooperate and give us information very readily. We do have subpoena powers. And so certainly we could, maybe even in this case, if we have to, use subpoena powers to get more information, assuming they don't come back with executive privilege as the official position today. I think we should be able to get the information we need from them, I would hope, but we could always use subpoena powers to get it. But during the course of the field work, they just cited executive privilege and just basically clammed up. So
I guess, is there something legislatively we could do as soon as, to me, after we've seen a couple other things happen in, with executive privilege, if you will, where people have done some things that are out of the ordinary, is there something that we could do legislatively that as soon as those words are spoken, that gets somebody else involved, even if it's to you?
I don't know. It happens so rarely. And there are, I believe, some attorney general opinions on executive privilege and the way to invoke it and how it can be invoked. And I think there are even some opinions about executive privilege in the audit process that go back years ago. I would have to do more research, but I do think there are proper tools in place right now. And I'm not even sure you could even have, if executive privilege is legitimately invoked, which is a matter for the attorneys, I suppose, to figure out. But if it's legitimately invoked, I don't know if there's any legislation that could possibly override or trump that.
My concern was that it happened a little while back and it should have kicked something into effect faster than this. That's all. I appreciate it. We'll get into it with them. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. I think my understanding is that executive privilege, there is no really review process that occurs right now. It's a authority that the governor and the governor's office can assert in certain circumstances that meets the statute or the Constitution. And so there's no formal review process. It obviously happens very rarely. I guess along those lines, Mr. Hook, then if they're asserting executive privilege, then if it was a proper assertion, you would be by implication mean that the governor's office was involved in this.
Under what the chief legal counsel advised us, I guess that would be the correct interpretation, yes.
Okay, then I would be curious to hear from DAT how the governor's office was involved in this. You're saying that they did not provide any written documentation that they're asserting executive privilege, only, I guess, verbally in communications back to you, right?
Adam, that's my understanding. Is that correct, Adam?
Yes, that is correct. That was the explanation we got while we were doing the field work.
Okay, so I think I'd be curious to see what is DAT's current position on this, because there seems to be a disconnect between what was conveyed to OLA and also the written documentation that was provided back. Any further, sorry, go ahead, Mr. Hook.
No, I said that's correct. That's correct.
Okay, any further questions? I'm not seeing any hands up. I'm not seeing any fingers up. I think that concludes this line of questioning for OLA. If we can bring up State Department of Assessments and Taxation, I believe we have Mr. Higgs, who is the director of DAT.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And again, for the record, my name is Michael Higgs. I'm the director of the Maryland Department of Assessments and Taxation. And I brought with me today Associate Director Corbett Webb to discuss the homeowner's tax credit issue, and in case anyone has any other tough questions. I would also like to thank our compliance director, Rebecca Copperberg, who assumed that important role in late 2019, but unfortunately she couldn't be with us today because she's meeting with the IRS for an on-site routine FTI audit. SDAT views these triennial audits as a partnership with the Office of Legislative Audits, and we sincerely appreciate their hard work to help us identify and implement process improvements so that we can provide better services for our customers. Thanks to the hard work of our team, this is one of the best audits we've had in decades. For the past few years, we've been focused on proactively improving our processes so that a number of the findings in today's report, including sending penalties to CCU and revising the homeowner's tax credit redemption and recapture process, were already corrected by the time they were identified by OLA. As for the others, I'm proud to say that we've implemented corrective actions for all of them and are doing so in a way that not only cures the audit findings, but also fits in with our overall plans to modernize and streamline processes to provide better services for our customers. In the past year and a half, we have doubled our tax credit audit staff, hired that program's first ever deputy program manager, allowed for online submissions of tax credit applications for the first time ever, and are now storing all homeowners and renters tax credit applications electronically. In January, all charter filings and annual reports will also be scanned in immediately as they are approved, and a new charter quality control team will be implemented to perform a number of new audits. In some cases, we have gone above and beyond, such as implementing a random supervisory review of work completed by all teams to catch mistakes on the front end and retrain those staff, which has led to a significant decrease in errors made. Although we're constantly working to improve our processes, our goal for the next audit is that there will be no repeat findings. We are here to answer any questions you guys have, but I'd like to start by addressing a couple of them that you mentioned. I'm going to turn it over to Corbett Webb after I address the personnel finding in number 6 to hit on the homeowner's tax credit issues. But the findings in number 6, first of all, I apologize profusely for any issues and delay in getting information there. It is our intention to be fully forthcoming on the details of this situation, 100%. And we were waiting to hear back on the official position of OLA in response to our staff's position that this was an internal personnel matter. Now that those have been resolved, we see that that this matter does need to be addressed with the auditors, and we will give them, if it pleases the committee, written responses that I will respectfully ask to be kept confidential and private in order to protect the sensitive privacy issues that are involved in this situation. Beyond that, again, I would love to answer every question, but being that this is a private forum, my preference is not to, and I would be more inclined to have one-on-one conversations with anyone who has concerns about this, and I'm happy to give every single detail and hide nothing. We have nothing to hide here. It's just that there are sensitive issues of a personnel nature, and we would respectfully request the ability to handle that in a private and confidential forum. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to Associate Director Webb to address the issues with the homeowner's tax credit.
Thank you, Director Higgs. Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to discuss and answer any questions about the other audit findings, but I know the homeowner's tax credit issue is one of particular interest. I think the timeline is pretty telling of our response. We've been calculating the credit this way, deducting certain local credits since, as Ole mentioned, at least 2005. I sincerely wish we'd changed our policy back then, but hindsight's 2020. In 2017, we started doing a deep dive on this issue. I believe that's when it was reported to OLA's hotline. In 2018, we determined internally to make the change in process. It took some time after them to get we requested a letter from our AG kind of verifying that the process was correct. We worked with DBM to make sure that the funding was included in our fiscal 20 budget. So, the reason it took us from 2017 before tax credit year 2020 to implement this change in procedure was just because we had to go through our due diligence, go through the process, get it included in our budget, take a fiscally responsible approach to it. And moving forward, it's a proactive change, so it will be applied for every year going forward. It's not a retroactive change, so we don't plan on issuing additional tax credits for years prior to 2020. I've heard some discussion about legislation being introduced. That's obviously the legislature's prerogative. We just request that if something doesn't get introduced, you work with us to make sure it's operationally possible and the least fiscal note to that extent. So with that, if you guys have any questions about finding 5, happy to go ahead and answer them.
Anything else from the department?
No, sir, that is all that we have to report, and we're here to address any questions you guys may have.
Okay, I see some hands raised. I think the first hand that had reached out, I guess virtually, was Senator Zucker. Chairperson Krim, did you want to have a
no,
chair's
I'll wait
reference?
finished.
Okay. Senator Zucker, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to both you and Chair Krim for your leadership. So I guess my question is, there's no corrective action right now to reimburse Maryland taxpayers for them being overcharged, not only from 2005, but last year. There's no corrective action that you all are doing to reimburse Maryland taxpayers?
No, there's not. And as you can see in our audit responses, we respectfully disagree with the OLA that there needs to be reimbursement for prior years. Again, I wish we'd made this policy change in 2005. We do as much as we can to support Maryland homeowners, particularly the lower income ones. We certainly do not want to take away tax credits, and we want to give them as much money as we can. But this was a policy change. It was based in part on a Maryland tax court opinion. It was sanctioned by our AG up until we asked them to do a deep dive on it. I think the portrayal of this as being incorrect, or, I think that's a bit disingenuous, but, we fixed it moving forward, and that's really what we're focused on and proud of. It's included in our fiscal 20 budget and the years moving forward. And that's our stance on that. Yep.
I'm sorry, were you saying that what the Office of Legislative Audits presented is disingenuous?
I think their portrayal of it being incorrect in the past and fixed moving forward, maybe disingenuous is the wrong word. I mean, I really respect their hard work and appreciate them trying to help us improve our processes, which benefits everyone. We just disagree that any reimbursements need to be made for prior years, or that the policy change needs to be made retroactively instead of proactively.
The 4.4 million, is that just from last year?
So when we did an analysis of it in 2018, I think our value was about 3.2 million, which is what we saw to be included in our fiscal 20 budget. Now with the homeowner's tax credit, it's hard to determine whether incomes will rise or decrease, or property taxes rise or decrease. So we never know exactly how much we're going to pay out. But then when OLA did their analysis, it was 4.4 million. It is only for homeowners in Montgomery County and Baltimore City who were receiving versions of the income offset tax credit, historic preservation tax credit, new construction tax credit. And again, I just want to reiterate, wish we changed this in 2005, but here we are today with, the budget we're allocated.
So just based, I guess I'm a budget guy. So just based on the number that you gave me in terms of the 3.2 million, which would be the average. So what you're saying is that since 2005, we're looking at roughly $48 million that probably could have gone to Maryland taxpayers that didn't go to their pocket, but went to the state coffers instead?
And this is just me making an assumption, but I believe the 4.4 million on a one-year basis to be the high end of that. I think over the years, these credits and the thresholds generally get increased. They're not tied to inflation, but because of inflation. So I think that's the high end estimate, but certainly since at least 2005, there were some homeowners who were receiving less tax credits from the state as compared to with our new calculation method where they would be receiving more.
And then finally, I don't want to monopolize too much time. So out of the 4.4 million, how much was Baltimore City?
Baltimore City was, I believe, about 5% of that. The main credit involved is the income offset tax credit, which I believe Montgomery County provides to every Maryland homeowner. Baltimore City didn't have a credit like that. At least I think this year they might have enacted one. But so Montgomery County was for all homeowners. Baltimore City was historic properties, new construction properties, kind of more specific group.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Chairperson Krim? You want to call the next person?
Sure. I don't think there's any delegates here. Senator Kramer.
Thank you for that, Madam Chair. Mr. Webb, I'm going to revisit the topic that Senator Zucker just addressed with you. And I'm hearing you repeatedly say, wish it had been done in 2005. However, it was not. I'm reading an article that was written by Lindsay Watts with Fox 5 News right now, indicating that, yes, this agency has been aware of this issue for years and either ignored it, failed to act on it, or just outright decided we're not going to change the policy despite the fact it conflicts with state law. So your reference to OIS being, I think you said disingenuous, to use your word, do you think that there is not some glaring hypocrisy here in that you've now concluded that you are interpreting the law mistakenly? You were wrong. So now you have changed the policy so that you're comporting with the law, and yet there is this simple, yeah, but we're not going to go back and address the fact that there are tax-paying residents of this state who were, pardon my French, screwed over, and you're not going to address that and make them whole. And that hypocrisy, I find to be somewhat glaring, and how do you rationalize that?
Sure, and I appreciate your comments. I can share a memo that I believe it was May 2018. So we became aware of this issue due to the report to the fraud hotline in 2017. We talked with our subject matter experts. We talked with our Attorney General's office. We talked with everyone at SSTAT. And at the time, they all agreed that the way we've been doing it was proper and correct. We looked into it a little more. And again, at the time in 2018, we decided there were two ways we could go. We could either deduct all local tax credits before calculating the homeowner's tax credit, or we could deduct none because our policy wasn't being adhered to uniformly across counties. To deduct all the tax credits would have drastically reduced the amount of money that Maryland homeowners would have received. To not deduct any would have increased it marginally for two counties. After we worked on that policy decision, we decided to go for the latter, not to deduct any, and then we approached our AG's office and asked them to do a deep dive on the issue. As they were researching it, not only did they agree with our interpretation, but they actually discovered a memo from, I believe, 1997, written by a prior AG that we hadn't seen before, or at least current administration staff, that again suggested the change was proper. So, from 1997 to 2005, how that changed, I'm not aware. I wasn't at the department then. But we addressed this issue as quickly as we could, again, keeping in mind that in 2017, everyone agreed that the way we were doing was correct. But even then, we didn't put it aside or brush it under the rug. We kept looking into it, realized there were some discrepancies in our administration, and then we corrected it. Again, after receiving the budgetary approval, the AG's opinion, the soonest that could happen was in 2020.
And the AG's opinion that we received in 2019 was blessing our new procedure going forward, saying that the new rules that we were trying to put in place to fix this disparity between how the various counties were treating their tax credits was something that was going to fix it. And prior to that, we had opinions from our AAG that said the way we were deducting the Montgomery County tax credits were proper. And there was also a tax credit or tax court hearing decision that said that what we were doing was proper in that respect as well. So what SDAT was doing, as far as we were concerned, was not in violation of state law, but that it was disparate treatment that was unintentional and needed to be resolved with new policies.
Mr. Higgs, do you have in writing that interpretation from the, and I'm guessing it was the AG, the assistant AG assigned to your agency?
Yes, sir.
That gave you this interpretation. Do you have that documented that you could provide to the committee members so that we could see A, that interpretation, and B, perhaps how this assistant AG came to that conclusion? And it still does not address the concern that I believe Senator Zucker and others have raised with regard to, you now realize the interpretation was wrong, despite the fact that it may have come, you know, from up on high. It turns out it was wrong. So now, is there any, you know, sense of responsibility to not only correct it going forward, which yes, that needs to be done, but what about the past, where we have constituents who did not receive what they should have in the way of these tax credits?
If that is the intent of the legislature, then we believe that that should be done with legislation.
Okay, thank you for that. Appreciate the candor.
And next we
Senator
have,
Hester. Senator Hester.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So while I share all the concerns that have just been raised, as Chair of the Joint Committee on Cyber IT and Biotech, I have to ask also about finding number 9, which has to do with the logging of critical database security and audit events. And I have several questions. My first is, I noticed that this is a repeat finding, and I'm wondering if it was only repeated for one audit cycle or for more. The second question is, why was it a repeat finding? Why did it take 4 years to make the changes that were made in January? And my third question is, now that you have made those changes and are reporting since January of 2020, what are you finding?
Sure. First of all, I apologize that my CIO is not with us today. He's also on site dealing with the IRS FTI audit. However, he asked me to pass along his comments on this finding. The OLA audit from several years ago told us that we needed to have better security logs, but they didn't detail what kind of security logs they were looking for. We asked them for more guidance on that and weren't really provided enough to go on to be able to set up the logs the way that they wanted to see them. Once they told us what they were looking for during this audit cycle, it was an incredibly easy fix. We implemented all of the procedures and processes that they asked for, and we're up to date now. So it was just a matter of us not getting the information from OLA after the first audit 3 years ago that we had requested to see what it was they were looking for.
Okay, I think we might want to give OLA a chance to respond to that. But just before we do, my third question was, what have you found now that you've been doing the reports?
We haven't found anything that caused concerns among my CIO or the state's CISO with DoIT that has been brought to my attention.
Okay, wonderful. Madam Chair, are we allowed to ask the auditors, you know, if they were approached in the preceding 4 years by the department for support?
Sure, sure. You want to respond?
I'm shocked if that happened, I apologize, because I'm shocked, because I do know as part of the information systems audit work, they have very, very detailed preliminary findings that they share with the agency, and they have their own exit conference to discuss the matter. The report may not have had the specific information that the executive director describes, but I would have thought the preliminary findings did. And with that, is Steve Jersey, our ISA director, still on the line? Steve, could you speak to that issue?
Certainly, Greg. And Senator Hester, as far as the finding, I believe it's a repeat just strictly since the prior audit. I don't have the audit report in front of me, but the language in the report would say it was repeated from multiple prior audits, if that was the case. But as far as the question on detailed information guidance as to the type of logging, the material, I'm pretty sure we shared that with the agency. I will say this, and I'll echo what Greg said, but I'll go back and check into our records, and I'll be glad to share to the committee as well as to SDAT the particulars of what we shared 2 audits back in terms of what needed to be logged.
Thank you very much. I'd appreciate that follow-up.
Sure thing.
Okay. Delegate Valentino Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I might not fully understand SDAT's procedure, so just a minute to clarify. So if a taxpayer owes you a lot of money, do you enter into some kind of payment process with them, or how many years do you have to collect it?
We refer them to CCU, and CCU handles those collection activities.
So if taxpayers, you've done assessments and all, owe you money, you send that somewhere for collections and expect the taxpayer to somehow comply with a payment system back to the state.
Right, and it's not for assessments. This is for tax credits. If a tax credit was determined to be improperly given based on subsequent information that comes to light, then the state will request that that tax credit be repaid by the citizen. I believe they go back 3 years typically, and CCU has a variety of options for payment plans and things to help people come back into compliance.
So you actually require some remediation back from the taxpayer if they've made a mistake. But I guess the conclusion of today's hearing is that a mistake in application of policy that might have inured to the benefit of the taxpayers isn't something that you equally afford the taxpayer.
That is correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that's unfortunate. And I guess we'll work with it in legislation, but thanks for clarifying your treatment of taxpayers.
Okay.
I have Senator Kagan who wanted to say something as well, and then back to Senator Kramer. Senator Kagan, I think you're muted.
I never do that. Thank you. I just want to associate myself with all of my colleagues. I don't want to take a lot of time, but Senator Zucker, Senator Kramer, and Delegate Geraldine Valentino Smith and others have all made the point. I don't get okay, now that we know that we messed up, tough luck is really a bad attitude. And it's such a huge contrast to what we just heard from the Department of Transportation and the MVA. When there's an error, they apologize and they fix it. And here there's an error and they're not acknowledging and they're not fixing it. And this is money. This isn't a form that wasn't filled out correctly. So I regret that there's you're going to have to do legislation to make us fix it, which is really just not the attitude that I would like to expect. So that's all I have to say. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Could I ask my question now, Mr. Chairman?
Sure. We also have Senator Kramer and Delegate Harrison later too. So
okay.
You want to go ahead?
Right. So to the agency director or administrator, I'm not sure what your proper title is. In January of 2018, Department of Legislative Services did a staffing adequacy study, and they went back to 2002. And in that study, it showed that DAT had 763 positions in 2002. In 2018, you had 592 positions. So it is suggested that you don't have the staff. And this has occurred over several administrations. This isn't pointing the finger at you necessarily, several administrations. So when we look back at when all this started, we can see that you had a reduction in staff, and that has continued to 2018. So are you hiring more people? Are you trying to resolve these staffing inadequacies? It just seems to me that you don't have the proper staff to comply with the statutes. You don't have enough people there to get the job done. So I need to know that, because as a legislator, and if we're having taxpayers losing money because there's inadequate staff in calculating these tax credits, then we need to know that and fix it. So can you comment on that, please?
Absolutely. It is absolutely fact that our agency has gotten smaller over the years. The vast majority of the personnel in the Department of Assessments and Taxation is assigned to the real property assessment division of the agency. They make up over 2/3 of our staff, probably approaching 3/4. And they are mostly located out in 24 county offices around the state. And they're the ones that are in charge of assessing real property for the triennial assessment and the every 3 years when you get a new value on your home and you pay property taxes based on that. The use of modern technology, the use of electronic information flow back and forth, the use of aerial imagery has made our ability to handle those assessment functions with fewer warm bodies much more efficient and effective. So we're able to continue to deliver outstanding results on the assessment side with fewer people. On the tax credit side, I don't believe that our agency has shrunk very much, if at all, over that time frame. In fact, we've added new departments over that time. We added a state office of taxpayer ombudsman or tax sale ombudsman. We just started a call center. We have a scanning department. So we've actually added people to the tax credit or the taxpayer services side of our department of late. Before COVID, let's address that because we're in a different budget situation post-COVID. Pre-COVID, whenever we would have any openings come up on the taxpayer services side of the house, we would get them filled right away, as quickly as we could. We are still doing that when we can, but it takes a little bit of extra coordination with DBM to fill positions that are vacant at the moment. But DBM has been a great partner with us, and they've helped us where we need staffing, where we have trouble with personnel. They have given us the green light to go ahead and make quick hires and fill positions. So I don't believe that we have any staffing problems that are leading to any difficulties that our agency is having. We're modernizing our technology, and that is going to help improve a lot of processes. Just like with MVA, we're trying to get off the mainframe and into the cloud and modernize the way that all of our customers interface with us. And that's going to, once we start automating some of the back-end processes, then really we help to eliminate human error, both on the input side from the customers and on the processing side for our own personnel. So these are in progress, and we're moving very rapidly toward this. And with that, we are able to elevate the level of work that our people are doing for us so that they're moving less physical paper around and doing more calculations and determinations and providing better customer service. So in short, I think that it's not a personnel issue. In this one, it was a policy issue. We were aware of the policy. We were aware of the fact that it needed to be changed, and we went and made the change. And looking back on it, I wish that we had made it more rapidly. We took a deliberative approach to this. And I apologize for that. It probably should have been more alarm bells going off and let's fix it right away. But instead, we went through the course of getting a budget appropriation issued and getting regulations changed, getting opinions from the AG's office and everything. And that led to, at the speed of government, 2020 being here and the changes has been implemented.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Kramer.
Thank you again, Madam Chair, and I'll try to be quick. First question, Mr. Higgs, you've indicated that the only way the taxpayers will be made whole and correction made will have to be legislatively. Should the legislature act to do this, does your office have the capacity to identify those taxpayers who were shortchanged so that they will be able to receive what is due them in the way of these tax credits?
Corbett?
Sure. Yes, we would have a way to identify those taxpayers. I think the operational difficulty is maybe, for example, if they don't live where they did in the year that they received the tax credit, if someone moved, how would they get the payment? But that's why I'd encourage, if any legislator is planning on drafting something, to reach out to us and we can figure that part of it out.
And will the agency work cooperatively with the legislature in its effort to ensure that these taxpayers receive what is due them?
Always we will cooperate with you guys. The one and only example anyone can find is the very unfortunate situation we're stuck here with today, and that is the finding number 6 that I promise you will have our full cooperation on in writing following this hearing. Everything else, SDAT is an open book. We are here to help you guys and serve you and your constituents in any way we can.
And that is appreciated. Last question, the final determination with regard to this decision about moving forward but not looking back at making the taxpayers whole. Is that a decision that was made by the Secretary of Budget and Tax? Is that a decision that came from the governor? And have either of them weighed in on this issue with regard to the position that SDAT is taking?
That decision was made by SDAT. And we have not asked them to weigh in on this.
Is there any reason that you perhaps would not ask for their sentiment and position on this as to what might be most appropriate with regard to making taxpayers whole?
They know what's going on. They have been apprised of the situation in reporting. I can certainly throw that up again and see if anyone would like to make comments from those two positions.
Okay, thank you very much.
We have Delegate Harrison, I think, has been waiting patiently.
Thank you. My question is probably a little bit more procedural, so I'm not sure if this should go to the chairs of the committee or how really it should be addressed. But we have, I guess it was Senator Fry had asked about some information, and it will be brought forward. I guess the OLA is going to look to see, if they received the request, and SDAT says that they did receive the request. Once we get that information and we find, wherever the miscommunication was, what happens next? What do we do? How do we address that so that going forward, we can make sure that we are doing everything that we need to do as legislators to ensure that there is trust in government? Because, that's kind of what a lot of this boils down to, in my opinion, is that, we already have a problem with individuals trusting government. And when we hear that there was a mistake made, but yet we're not going to go back and address it, that adds to a lack of trust in government. So how do we move forward? What's the next step?
Mr. Hook, you can respond to that if you wouldn't mind.
If I could, I'll quote William Pitt when they were debating the Stamp Act in Parliament, where he said, "I do not speak twice, I only finish." So I'll speak again. The issue about the Senator Fry Hester and the IT repeat finding, I'm looking at the prior report right now, and the prior department's, the response from the department, the prior report. There were 2 recommendations, and in each case, SDAT agrees with the finding, corrective action has been completed. So in both cases, they had fixed it before the report even came out. So I would be shocked if we refused to cooperate with SDAT, and I think it may be more of a misunderstanding. But to address the delegate's question going forward, there's nothing the committee has to do about OLA cooperating with the agencies. We'll make sure that happens going forward. I think it happened in the past, but we'll redouble our efforts to make sure that there is no misunderstanding between us and the people we're auditing. The other question about trust, I guess, deals with the finding on the tax credit, I suppose. And that issue, I don't have an answer for that. I don't know what to say about that. We found it. They've agreed to fix it, and it's just a question of how far back do you go to make everybody whole. And I don't know how to address that from my bureaucrat's position.
Okay, thank you, Mr.
Delegate Harrison. Oh, so Senator McCray, not speaking twice, but speaking again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. My question, I guess I asked OLA Director Higgs, was in reference to just the threat or the liability because of the decision that you made or the decision that you chose in reference to those taxpayers not receiving some form of a reimbursement. Could you tell us what went into your decision making, and how did those 2 subject matters, the threat to Maryland and the liability that could be out there to Maryland, went into your decision making for the department?
Sure. There is no legal liability to the state or the department. The liability would be for the repayment of any tax credits that were deemed to be improperly issued. We haven't deemed them to be improperly issued tax credits. We have deemed this to be a change in policy that was put into motion in 2017 and effectuated with the budget of 2020. So in our estimation, this was not an error. We did nothing wrong. We simply changed policies, and the new policy is being put in place going forward. If the legislature has a disagreement with our position that this wasn't a mere change in policy, but that SDAT was in error and that the people do deserve refunds on their those tax credits, then we are more than happy to implement it. But our reading of the law says that this was not an error on SDAT's part, but it was a change in policy.
And I know that, can I follow up, Mr. Chair?
Yes, proceed.
Thank you. I know that the Attorney General's office was brought up in some of the previous questioning for the OLA. But have you all consulted with the Attorney General's office? And can you speak to that if you have?
Corbett?
Sure. So we did. We consulted with their Attorney General's office, and they said there's no legal authority requiring us to make retroactive payments for prior years. And then that's also in our responses to the audit.
Thank you.
Okay. Seeing no other questions, I do have a few questions for Mr. Higgs. And this is to follow up on the points that Delegate Ahrens was bringing up earlier about executive privilege. Are you asserting now that you are no longer asserting executive privilege over finding number 6?
I'm not asserting executive privilege.
Okay. And can you just describe just generally what is the process used to approve administrative leave? Because this seems to be that this exceeded the normal 10-day leave limit.
The process normally is that the director signs off on administrative leave.
Did you sign off on this leave?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And are you able to share that rationale then with OLA? as to why that leave was provided?
I'm able to
'Cause it
share
seems like-
everything with OLA, but I have respectfully requested the ability to do this in writing so that it's kept private and confidential. If you would like to tell me that you decline that request, then we'll deal with it.
Okay. There hasn't been anything shared in writing, I guess, beyond what Mr. Hook had said earlier, which was
That's
very
true, because
limited.
we haven't received an opportunity to have anything else in writing. This is our opportunity now, and we are going to take full advantage of it.
Okay. So if you're no longer asserting executive privilege, that means that that this was not in any way involving the governor's office. This is something that was addressed on the departmental level or the agency level with you, and that this can be that this can be worked out with OLA then, right? That in the follow-up communications
I'm telling
with our
you,
auditors.
there is nothing that OLA is going to want to know about this that I will not tell them in 100% complete candor.
Okay. And you can share the position title with them as well?
Yes, they know what it is. They have all sorts of details on this.
It seemed like Mr. Hook was conveying that there was very limited basis by which this.
Mr. Chair, we
Mr.
have
Hook.
some information, but I'm prevented. This was an HR matter, so you have to be careful what you put in a public report. The Office of Legislative Audits, as a practice and a rule for years, does not mention individuals by name or agent or entities, corporations, anything. We try to be as generic as possible to protect privacy. So we do have certain information in our work papers, and we are lacking some, but we do have certain information in our work papers, which the law does allow me to share with the committee, but to help them understand the report, which I can do. And I would second the mention made by the executive director. I'm not sure a public forum is the place to do that. I can certainly share with the committee what information we have in a private setting. The law allows me to do that because it is confidential information. And I think what the executive director is saying is that once I send my report follow-up letter asking for more information and the basis for this award, he will provide that information to us.
That is correct.
Did you assert Mr. Higgs' executive privilege before?
I don't recall that.
That's not what Mr. Hook conveyed earlier.
I don't recall how it went down. I did tell them that I didn't believe that this was within the scope of their purview. I don't remember if that word was used. I certainly didn't go to the governor's office and get their clearance for this. This is a matter of OLA and SDAT resolving this matter, and this was it was our policy not to discuss personnel matters.
Do you believe it's within the scope of the purview of OLA currently?
Yes.
Okay. Would you be able to provide written response then, let's say within 2 weeks? I guess that would fall right before a holiday.
Yes.
2 weeks from now?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I mean, when we get
Well, I need to send my letter out first, and then, I mean,
Okay.
we'll work on that this week. I need to send the letter out first.
Okay.
Because there may be
I think
other
we would like something in writing. It sounds like there has been an absence of information in writing about this finding, and I think we would like to know more as well. So thank you for clearing that up. And we will follow up and make sure that this is adhered to a timeline.
I will caution the committee that when I do share information under State Government 21226, I've been advised by one of the Assistant Attorney Generals for the General Assembly that the confidentiality provision applies to anybody I give the information to. So if it's confidential from my perspective, then whoever I give it to has to treat it as confidential as well. So the committee can receive it, but it has to be retained as confidential information by the members.
Right, and I think we certainly understand that and want to abide by that too. There are some public sources to be able to glean some of the information about this finding as well. But I think for purposes of what's disclosed from the auditors to the committee, we certainly wanted to understand that and recognize that too.
Okay, very good.
I think Delegate Arentz has a follow-up.
Yes, sir, Senator. Thank you very much. Just for the public to talk about this, as we talk about it, it sounds like something is very private and personal here. What are we able to walk out with to our constituents you know, there's a lot of going on about the government right now and how things are, quote unquote, not being explained very well. What do we go out to the people with on this?
Mr. Higgs?
I honestly don't know how to answer that question.
You're aware that other things have come up. We've seen some other items come up on Facebook, and our constituents are looking at government spending here, there, and everywhere. And this is now out there a little bit, and we're talking about a significant amount of money. And somebody's going to say, hey, delegate, what's up? Here's once again, we see the government overstepping its bounds, and I need to have a response. And it isn't the response saying, well, there's some relevant information that we can't disclose to you right now.
Right.
Sounds worse.
And this situation is going to take a little longer to play out while we have a back and forth with the OLA.
Okay, so I don't really have an answer I can go out with.
We can tell them that the legislative committee is delving into this issue, and you guys take it very seriously, as does SDAT and the OLA, and we are working together to get to the bottom of it.
Okay, thank you very much. Let
me just try to, Mr. Hook, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, can I put words in the executive director's mouth, which is essentially that it won't happen again?
Absolutely.
I think that's what the taxpayers, yeah. Okay.
Well, no, the taxpayers actually would be concerned with that it happened at all.
I would agree, but I think you also have certainly, it's helpful if they know that SDAT has agreed that it will not happen again, and that something, that's all I'm saying.
Okay, thank you.
And I share Delegate Aaron's concern, and I think the other way to frame it, which is the way that we also have to be responsive to our constituents too, is that if you actually look at the dates that this employee was working, he was working for 36 calendar days, 26 business days, and yet he earned $56,000 over 5 months of supposed work. And so if there's an explanation to this that we can go back to provide back to our constituents who, you know, ultimately we are accountable to, we would like to know how to be able to do that. And I think that's what Delegate Ahrens was getting at. Mr. Higgs, anything else to add?
No, sir, not at this time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions from other members of the committee? I am not seeing any, so I think we can proceed along the agenda, which I think now proceeds back to Mr. Hook with the fraud activity update.
Yes, wow. This has gone a little longer than I had anticipated. Do we have an end time for this hearing, just out of curiosity? So I know how to budget our time. We still have 3 presentations to make, so I'm just kind of wondering if we should tailor them somewhat.
I think tailor them as is reasonable. Obviously, we're all, looking at the clock as well.
Okay, well, I think this next one is probably, of the 3 left, ranking them, this is probably maybe the most important. And then the last one is probably next in the list. This one is the Fraud Investigation Unit, and traditionally this is a rather routine segment of the December meeting, but this time I think you'll find it highly informative. Before Joe McWilliams speaks to you about our efforts and results, I'm going to steal, well, sorry, that's probably a bad word to use in a fraud presentation, some of his good news, and mention that efforts are underway to increase the size of OLA staff dedicated to fraud-related activity, which frankly in the past was woefully small based on the size of state government. Even with what I believe were very limited resources, the OLA's FIU has accomplished much, and Joe will highlight those results in a minute. In addition, OLA is preparing potential language for legislation, which is modeled in part after other state auditors and local government inspectors' general abilities to strengthen our own ability to identify and investigate potential frauds. Also, OLA had some surprising news recently about a previous finding that resulted from an allegation to our hotline. In our July 2017 report on the Department of Juvenile Services, finding 3 identified significant procurement-related deficiencies, including artificially dividing purchases and certain questionable procurements, which OLA believed involved a DJS management individual and a DJS vendor. We referred the matter to the Attorney General Criminal Division at the time, and Joe will talk about the outcome from that referral, which will assist in demonstrating the value of the FIU. The committee should note that the FIU does not always discover potential fraud and make referrals to the Criminal Division, but it still frequently uncovers or aids other staff in uncovering significant control deficiencies. I will conclude my remarks by saying that it has been a long process from the origination of the OLA's fraud hotline many years ago at the direction of this committee to where we find ourselves now and to what we hope to become. With that said, Joe, can you please provide some background to the committee?
Yes, thank you, Greg. Again, my name is Joe McWilliams. I'm the Fraud Investigation Manager in charge of OLA's Fraud Investigation Unit. Next page, please. OLA established its fraud hotline in 2003 at the request of the Joint Audit Committee. The hotline was staffed with auditors who would answer calls and investigate allegations. OLA dedicated additional employees to the hotline over the past several years because of the significant findings identified through these allegations. And in early 2020, OLA established its Fraud Investigation Unit, or FIU. The FIU is staffed by a team of professionals with the technical expertise, training, and most importantly, the passion for detecting, stopping, and preventing fraud in state government. Next page, please. The hotline has evolved since 2003, especially over the past few years. It was no longer just an auditor answering calls and conducting periodic investigations. Its role has expanded to include activities such as fraud training, risk assessments, and support for OLA auditors reviewing allegations and other high-risk matters. With this expanded role and plans for further development in the future, OLA decided to establish the FIU. The FIU's activities are divided into administrative and investigative operations. Administrative operations includes the day-to-day fraud hotline administration, allegation due diligence, outreach, and education. Investigative operations, where we focus the most of our resources, includes audit support, special investigations, and fraud brainstorming and risk assessments. Next page, please. While the majority of the FIU's time is focused on investigative operations, the administration of our fraud hotline is still our most vital function, and for good reason. Studies have consistently shown that fraud hotlines are the best tool to detect fraud. In fact, a study released by the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners in 2020 shows that 43% of frauds were detected by hotline tips, and median losses by entities with fraud hotlines were reduced by 50%. Now, we receive allegations by phone, through our website, by mail, and from OLA auditors who identify something questionable during their audits. Depending on the nature of the allegations, we may decide to review them during a regular audit of an agency or separate special review. We may refer them to applicable state agencies for appropriate action, or we may decide not to pursue the allegations further if insufficient information is provided by the tipster. Next page, please. We receive allegations on a wide variety of topics, many of which don't fall within the scope of what our office handles. Regardless, we always strive to be a valuable resource to our callers. Although we may not handle a particular allegation, we understand that it's a difficult situation for the caller, and we do our best to provide guidance to them by referring them to an applicable state agency for help. For example, when someone from the public calls because their identity may have been compromised and they don't know what to do, we refer them to the Office of the Attorney General's Identity Theft Unit. Next page, please. Our hotline has received over 400 allegations on average per year. You'll notice a decrease in the number of calls this year due to the impact of the COVID-19 restrictions on state operations, but overall, our hotline continues to be a productive resource for the state. Next page, please. Now, a hotline is only effective when people know it's available, which is why we use various methods to promote our hotline, such as biannual messages on state employees' payroll notices, displaying fraud posters in state offices, and requesting that agencies send annual emails to their employees with information about our hotline. One of the reasons our hotline is productive is because we are independent from the other branches of state government. State employees can trust that we will keep their information confidential to prevent retaliation. Unfortunately, certain judicial and executive branch agencies have denied our request to display fraud posters in their offices and send emails to their employees with information about our hotline. These agencies informed us that they preferred to have their employees report allegations internally so they can handle the situations directly. This is concerning to us because many hotline callers are hesitant to report allegations due to the fear of retaliation from their agencies. And if state employees aren't aware of our hotline, frauds could go unreported and continue to occur, resulting in significant losses to the state. So to resolve these issues, as Greg mentioned, OLA will be proposing new legislation this coming session that would require all agencies to cooperate with our fraud hotline awareness efforts, including displaying our posters in their offices and distributing our fraud hotline information to their employees. Next page, please. Now I'm going to highlight the results of a few of our investigations over the past year. As I previously mentioned, investigations may occur as part of our regular audits or as separate special reviews. The findings I'll go over today were all performed by the FIU in conjunction with regular audits. Copies of the findings and the agency's responses are included in the back of this presentation. Next page, please. I already discussed the Department of Assessments and Taxation finding during a prior presentation, so we can skip to the next page regarding the Department of Housing and Community Development, or DHCD. So this investigation was initiated based on an allegation received through our hotline regarding the improper use of marketing contracts by DHCD. The results of our investigation were included in finding 2 of our audit report. While the finding references issues with improper use of marketing and construction management contracts, I'm going to focus on the marketing contracts, which were the subject of the allegation. Now, agencies are required to follow applicable procurement regulations, which typically require issuing a solicitation, obtaining bids, and awarding to the lowest bidder that meets the requirements. This process helps to ensure there's transparency with the procurement process and that the state is receiving the best value. But this did not always happen at DHCD. Instead of going through the proper procurement process, DHCD used 2 existing marketing contracts to obtain goods and services, certain of which appeared questionable. DHCD had directed one of the marketing contractors to purchase promotional supplies and computer tablets totaling approximately $90,000 that were not included in the scope of the marketing contract. DHCD advised us that these items were used as promotional giveaways and raffle prizes at various events, but they couldn't provide any documentation showing who received the tablets, nor could they identify the specific events where the giveaways and raffles occurred. DHCD directed the second marketing contractor to pay another vendor $50,000 for services related to the development of a home buyer education campaign. DHCD had received an unsolicited proposal from this vendor for these services, but rather than entering into a contract with the vendor, DHCD directed the marketing contractor to pay the vendor. Neither DHCD nor its marketing contractor had a formal agreement with the vendor describing the services that were to be provided, and neither party had monitored the vendor to ensure services were actually provided. And to make matters worse, the $50,000 payment was authorized by DHCD and paid by the marketing contractor prior to the vendor providing any services. Next page, please. The last investigation I'm going to discuss today pertains to Spring Grove Hospital Center. Most of the allegations we receive come through our hotline, but in this case, the FIU was made aware of the issues by OLA's auditors conducting the regular audit of Spring Grove. They were advised by Spring Grove management that the Department of Health's Office of the Inspector General had issued a report regarding questionable procurements involving a Spring Grove management employee and another employee. When reviewing the Inspector General's report, we noticed that the management employee was previously involved in questionable procurements during a special review we conducted in 2008. This employee had separated from state service after that report was issued, but was later rehired by a senior management employee at Spring Grove who was also involved in the questionable procurements included in our special review. Due to the increased risk of questionable activity presented by these circumstances, the FIU was asked to expand on the audit team's review of procurements. Finding 1 in our report dealt with Spring Grove's procurement of dietary equipment costing $800,000. As I mentioned before, state procurement regulations typically require issuing a solicitation, obtaining bids, and awarding to the lowest bidder that meets the requirements. While this procurement included all of those steps, we found that the equipment designs and physical requirements included in the solicitation had favored the equipment of a specific vendor, which I will refer to as the questionable vendor. We also noted that the senior management employee I had referenced earlier had corresponded directly with the questionable vendor regarding this solicitation. The content of this correspondence raised further questions about the propriety of the procurement. The 3 bids were ultimately received on the procurement, but 2 of the bidders were deemed non-responsive because they couldn't meet the requirements in the solicitation. Consequently, even though the questionable vendor had the second lowest cost bid, Spring Grove awarded them the contract because they were the only bidder that could meet the requirements. Finding 2 of our report describes issues with smaller procurements handled by Spring Grove. Now, before I get into these issues, I want to give you a brief overview of some procurement regulations. Generally, procurements over $15,000 require an additional level of control and transparency. These procurements require public postings of written solicitations and the related awards on the Maryland marketplace. Once the dollar amounts go up, it could require additional oversight. For example, the Department of Health delegates procurements under certain dollar thresholds to Spring Grove. When procurements exceed this threshold, Spring Grove is supposed to submit them to the Department of Health for processing. The procurement authority granted to Spring Grove was $25,000 until October 2017, and then it was increased to $50,000. As you'll notice later, the $25,000 threshold is a key amount. Lastly, for purchases between $5,000 and $15,000, they still require 2 bids. However, the agencies are allowed to directly solicit bids from specific vendors they choose. Although state procurement regulations prohibit agencies from artificially dividing procurements to circumvent these requirements, we found that Spring Grove had a pattern of splitting purchases from vendors into multiple purchase orders while also making additional payments to these vendors without a purchase order. We selected 10 of these vendors for review and identified issues with the procurement and monitoring of 7 of them. These issues resulted in payments exceeding the purchase order values, overpayments to vendors, and other questionable activity. For example, one of these vendors received several purchase orders over a 3-year period, each valued at $25,000. And in one of those years, Spring Grove paid the vendor an additional $49,000 without any purchase order. Spring Grove also issued annual purchase orders, each totaling $24,960 to a former employee for maintenance services without soliciting any other bids and without publishing the awards on eMaryland Marketplace. The last example I'll highlight relates to a questionable purchase of 4 exterior doors totaling $23,000. Rather than publicly soliciting bids for all 4 doors, Spring Grove obtained individual quotes for each door and then combined them into one purchase order. While the procurement file showed that 2 bids were received and the award was made to the lowest bidder, we identified revised bids submitted by the winning bidder on the same day the losing bidder submitted its bids, which increased the price by $500. There was no change in the scope of work and no explanation from the bidder for the increased cost. We also identified bids from a third bidder maintained outside of the procurement file that totaled $1,800 less than the winning bidder, and Spring Grove could not explain why this bidder was not considered. Due to the questionable nature of the matters in these findings, we referred them to the Attorney General's Criminal Division. I do have to point out that a referral to the Criminal Division does not mean a criminal act has occurred or that charges will be filed. Now, these smaller dollar amounts may not initially sound like a big issue considering some of the huge contracts awarded by the state in general, but they do add up to a significant amount of money, and the relaxed procurement requirements and limited oversight make them a high risk for fraud. This is evident from the presentation we gave at a prior Joint Audit Committee hearing regarding the Department of Juvenile Services report issued in November 2017. As Greg mentioned, this finding described how DJS had a practice of artificially dividing procurements to circumvent state procurement regulations. This practice allowed DJS employees to process procurements without much oversight and resulted in significant questionable activity. As a result of that investigation and our referral to the Attorney General's Criminal Division, a former DJS employee was charged a couple weeks ago with theft, making false statements, and multiple counts of receiving bribes. In addition, one of the vendors included in our investigation had previously been charged with multiple counts of bribing a public official. A plea hearing for the former DJS employee and a sentencing hearing for the vendor are both scheduled for later this week. The charges filed against the former DJS employee was breaking news for us, and as you can tell, the amount of time between our referrals to the criminal division and the disposition of the cases can be significant. In this regard, OLA plans to propose new legislation that would allow us to become more of a partner in the investigations with the criminal division. Having the ability to coordinate investigations and share information should benefit both agencies as we work to stop fraud in state government. Next page, please. In addition to the investigations I highlighted, the FIU also provided support on 18 other reviews and audits, such as the Opioid Operational Command Center, University of Maryland Medical System Corporation, and the Motor Vehicle Administration. We assist audit teams by performing a variety of activities. We help to develop procedures to address allegations. We analyze transactions to identify fraud indicators. We perform specialized research. We do anything we can to help our audit teams produce effective results. And I believe this is one of the FIU's most impactful functions. We all have the same mission. The FIU team is just a little unique because we constantly think about fraud. How can we find it? How can we stop it? And how can we prevent it? Next page, please. As Greg mentioned, it's been a long process from the origination of OLA's fraud hotline to where we are now with the new FIU. We've evolved and expanded to ensure the FIU is a valuable resource to OLA and the legislature, and we will continue to do so to help prevent and detect fraud, waste, and abuse in state government. That concludes my presentation. Thank you for your time, and we are happy to answer any questions you may have.
I might add that OLA is quite proud about the work Joe and his group are doing, and we see just better results even going forward as we expand our capacity and hopefully get some additional laws.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you to you and your team. I think this really exemplifies why the hotline and the ability for folks to report in is so important.
Agreed.
Chairperson Krim?
Yeah, I just want to remind the committee that we've received a message from our staff saying that we have a hard stop at 1:30. So if we could limit questions, that would be great. So I have one question from Delegate Valentino Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just very quickly, wondering whether or not in the work that you're doing, any of these whistleblower reports have resulted in any Keaton lawsuits and awards to the whistleblowers.
I don't think we, Joe, I don't think we know.
Not that I'm aware of. When a complainant or tipster contacts us, we keep their information confidential. We do not disclose it, at all. And so, if a complainant wanted to file a suit, then they would have to approach the Office of the Attorney General for that matter.
Right, but you're not aware of any at this time.
I am not, no.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Like we have
one more
Chairperson
question.
Krim.
Yeah, with Delegate Aronson, we'll have to move on.
That's real quick. Just are there consequences in place for, and does that go to the Attorney General for the person that's committing the crime, I guess? For the guy that's taking advantage of it, the vendor.
Yeah, go ahead, Joe. Yeah.
Yeah. Once we investigate the matter, we do refer it to the criminal division, and then they conduct their investigation and can perform any additional legal action.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, we sit down with the criminal division in person and lay out all the documents we have and all the red flags and all our work, and then they make an assessment whether they'll accept the case or not. But in this case, we explained to them what we found with the employee and with the vendor, so they were aware of both pieces.
Okay, thank you.
No other questions. We have representatives of the agencies here too, right, Mr. Hook? Mr. Hook, you're muted.
I believe that's correct. I thought there was representatives in case any questions came up from the committee. Liz or Steve Ross could opine. I don't know if they're here or not.
I think some of them are. Are they expecting to speak, or is this just for answering any questions?
I think it's just answering questions.
Okay. Any other questions for the agencies, Mr. Doggett, others? Okay, seeing none, we can proceed to the next part of the agenda, which is a report on the follow-up process and repeat audit findings.
Okay, second to the last. Okay, the penultimate report is the audit follow-up process and repeat audit findings. This presentation is another that is historically given in the December committee meeting, and it provides some background and current information on OLA's audit follow-up process and repeat audit findings. We believe that the processes we will describe have proven useful means to generally achieve audit compliance. This presentation will be given by Christine Timanis. Chris is an assistant director in OLA's Quality Assurance and Professional Development Division. This division provides a quality control process to ensure that the overall reliability and integrity of our audit reports and compliance with professional auditing standards. The division also coordinates OLA's recruiting, training, and professional development activities and oversees our administrative functions. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris. Chris, are you there?
I am.
Take it away.
Thank you, Greg. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, and members. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss the various audit follow-up processes OLA has in place for repeat audit findings. On page 2 of the presentation, we have provided an overview of repeat audit findings. And as a bit of background, at the end of each fiscal year, we prepare an analysis of fiscal compliance audits, including repeat findings. Our analysis as of June 30th, 2020 includes the latest audit report for each agency we audit, generally every 3 to 4 years. And this represents our full audit cycle and includes the 187 audits that we performed that year. As of June 2020, we are seeing about 28% of findings repeated in the first subsequent audit, which is a significant improvement compared to 40% of findings repeated back in June 2006. In the past few years, we're starting to see a slight uptick in the percentages again. There are 2 follow-up processes in place for repeat audit findings as discussed on page 3. First, state law requires agencies with 5 or more repeat findings to provide an initial status report to OLA on corrective actions taken and within 9 months, and thereafter quarterly status reports until satisfactory progress is made. The second process was instituted through budget bill language and committee narrative, the Joint Chairman's Report, whereby agencies with 4 or more repeat audit findings have their appropriations restricted until corrective action is taken by the agencies. And OLA submits reports on its determination regarding the actions taken. Page 4 includes some historical perspectives on the follow-up process for agencies with 5 or more repeat findings. Page 5 shows there were 2 audit reports issued during calendar year 19 that had 5 or more repeat findings. The quarterly status report is still in progress for both agencies and will be subject to an OLA desk review. As of calendar year 2020, there have been no reports so far issued with 5 or more repeat findings. On page 6 of the presentation, we provide background related to the JCR follow-up process, and this process restricts funding for agencies with 4 or more repeat audit findings until the submission of a report by OLA on the status of the corrective actions. The annual amount of funds restricted is generally about $100,000, but that amount can vary. On page 7, I'd like to highlight that the April 2020 JCR contained budget bill language restrictions for 2 agencies, as we detailed on page 8. OLA has now received reports from both DGS and DHS detailing the corrective actions that will be taken, and OLA will review these reports and report on our conclusions to the budget committees. In addition to these 2 agencies, we'd like to highlight on page 9 that the April 2020 JCR contained budget bill language restrictions for 3 agencies that had repeat findings on the failure to safeguard PII. The State Treasurer's Office, the Department of Budget and Management, and the State Department of Education each had $100,000 in general fund appropriation for administration withheld until 1, agency representatives meet with the State Chief Information Security Officer the SCISO, to identify and document a path to resolve the findings. Number 2, the SCISO submits a report to OLA by February 1st, 2021, addressing the corrective actions taken to protect PII, a path and timeline for resolving any outstanding issues, as well as any ongoing costs associated with the corrective actions. And 3, OLA submits a report of its results to the budget committees and the JAEC by May 1st, 2021. OLA has not received the SCISO's report as of yet. In conclusion, on page 10, we believe the various follow-up processes provide useful tools to compel state agencies to take meaningful corrective action to implement audit recommendations. We've seen the overall percentage of repeat findings decrease from about 40% to 28% now in 2020. While the percentages have remained virtually unchanged for several years, we started to see a slight uptick in the percentages as shown on page 1 of the exhibit. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Chris.
Great. Thank you for that. Go ahead, Mr. Hook.
No, I'm just, any questions?
Yes, I have a question. You know, I have heard from members of this committee about not having enough, I don't want to say punishment, that's not what I'm saying, but something that would induce these agencies to comply. And so we don't have repeat findings other than just withholding funds in the JCR. So do you have any suggestions or anything that perhaps other states may do? So that's my question.
We can certainly, I don't have any suggestions at the moment. And I do know with this JCR language, even $100,000, we've had some agencies go to extreme measures to fix the problem because that's a lot of money to them because it's general fund appropriation. And it's usually in the administration at the agencies. So I think that is a very valuable tool. I can certainly ask, I can do a survey and I can send a question to the National State Auditors Association about that and find out what other state auditors do and other legislative auditors do. And I can certainly get back to the committee at some point. I'm not sure how quick I'll get a response because I'm trying to collect information from more than 50, because there's Guam and Puerto Rico and Marshall Islands involved. But I can certainly try to see what other states do. But I think the current process is actually fairly effective. And I understand why the committee members are frustrated by it. Ideally, you'd want no repeats. And honestly, I don't know why some repeats occur. For example, we talked about SSTAT just a couple of minutes ago. I'm convinced we gave them the proper information, but it just could have been confusion on their part on how to implement it. And I don't know how you take that into account, because their response to the report looked good. So we didn't know it was a repeat till 3 years later. We thought everything was resolved before that. So I don't know the answer to your question, but I'll try to get some best practices if I can.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I share Delegate Crim's interest in this too. I think having some more information about what other states are doing to ensure that these audits are followed up with and complied by the agencies and departments is really important. So if you could let us know, that would be great.
Sure. We'll look into it.
And it's also a credit to the hard work that the folks at Office of Legislative Audits do too. I think we recognize and appreciate all of the work that you do. It's oftentimes a thankless job working in the background, but these hearings are an opportunity for you to be able to highlight some of the good work that's being done, and important too.
Mm-hmm. I do think other states, I will say this, I do believe other states, many of them conduct performance audits, which are different than what we're doing. We're doing, we have to audit every state agency once a certain period of time. Other states do performance audits, which are much rarer. They're not as frequent. And so they have the ability to do timely follow-up on those to make sure the agencies are complying with their recommendations. When you're auditing 180 agencies over 3 years, it does get to be something of a resource issue. I mean, certainly we could do a more focused follow-up on these report findings and the corrective action. But honestly, I don't have the staff to do that. And I know other states, for example, the New Jersey legislative auditor, or state auditor, but he's a legislative auditor, in fact, He's supposed to audit every state agency as well over a cycle, but he has the ability to waive that requirement if he doesn't have sufficient resources to do it. So, you know, our primary focus is just auditing the agencies. And so I know when I do this survey, one of the things I'm going to get is they do a periodic follow-up, but I know it's just on performance audits and not on 180 audits over a 3 or 4 year cycle. But I'll still ask, and I'll try to find other methods. Most certainly.
Great. Chairperson Krim, if you're saying something, you're muted.
No, I was just going to say we have Senator Hester.
Oh, Senator Hester, go ahead.
I just wanted to add my thanks. I think this audit team does an exceptionally great work. And in addition to the state agencies, the state also does audits of the local school systems. And we've just seen what happened in Baltimore with the ransomware attack. And that was, flagged earlier. So I think if we could just get our agencies at the state and local level to, some extra support, it's critical.
Yeah, I think that's a valid concern, and again with Baltimore, you're right. Baltimore County, several of those findings, especially the ones about the servers in a protected network, that was a repeat from 6 years ago. And I think a Baltimore Sun article came out recently where they surveyed other audits we had done at Howard County and Carroll County and the like, and they found Anne Arundel, and they found similar problems. And we have to take their word for it. When they come back and say they fixed it, we're presuming they're going to fix it. And like I said, I would like to go out and check some of these periodically, but truthfully, I just don't have the resources right now to do that. It's just it's
staff.
I think we echo Senator Hester's remarks at the end there too. Any other questions before we proceed? Okay, seeing none, we can proceed to I think this is the last piece, Mr. Hook, summary of reports issued and recommended committee action from October through November.
The final presentation is a summary of the audit reports issued during the period from October 1st to November 30th, 2020. The key points of this document can be found on pages 3 and 5, which summarize unresolved issues from 2 audits where OLA was unable to obtain agency agreement to implement audit recommendations. For these items, we are requesting that the committee issue a letter of concern to the agency, requesting its reconsideration of the disagreement. The details start on page 3, if we could turn to page 3, which is the Comptroller of Maryland Information Technology Division, and highlights 2 disagreements, finding 1 and finding 4. The first disagreement is over the need to implement recommendations to provide adequate safeguards over PII. The controller cites a tremendous cost to implement the necessary control, which may well be true, but what is troubling, this is my personal opinion, what is troubling is the lack of planning for addressing this issue. During the 2017 session, Delegate Stein introduced legislation requiring PII to be safeguarded, but the related fiscal note included very high cost estimates, some from the controller. So for that reason, I believe the bill did not advance. And I'm going to get on my soapbox for the second time today. I think we have to ask ourselves, when will the state start planning for correcting this problem, or are we just willing to accept the risk? Interestingly, this issue, including the concept of funding plans for corrective measures, is similar to the one that led to withholding of appropriations from the 3 agencies in last year's JCR, which you just heard about in the preceding presentation from Chris Tamanis. My opinion is that similar questions as contained in the aforementioned JCR language should be asked of the Comptroller's Office on this issue in the letter of concern. The Comptroller's disagreement on the second finding is frankly odd. It is a repeat finding that the Comptroller agreed to correct during the last audit, and now they refuse. The finding is the need for the Comptroller to limit IT contractors' access to just the IT systems they are working on. Frankly, it's just pretty basic stuff. And I would like a letter of concern also asking for a reconsideration of that disagreement. An equally strange disagreement is included on page 5 for Frostburg University's finding number 1. In this instance, I believe that the OLA is making a common sense recommendation. Specifically, the USM Board of Regents has a policy allowing its institutions to use a certain procurement methodology if an institution makes certain determinations. The policy does not require that these determinations be documented, And obviously OLA believes they should be. Frankly, this gets to the root of auditing. If decisions do not have to be documented, we might as well stop auditing, since we'll just be taking everyone's word for it that they're doing things correctly. I might also add that the recommended documentation is not even remotely onerous to Frostburg. For those reasons, OLA requests a letter of concern from the committee asking for a reconsideration by Frostburg University of a rather simple concept. And frankly, based on this condition, I am contemplating reviewing Board of Regents policies during the next audit of the University System of Maryland office for deficient documentation requirements elsewhere in their policies. But that concludes my presentation, and I would basically, I guess we need a motion. I would request 2 letters of concern, one to the Comptroller of Maryland and one to Frostburg State University.
So moved.
Are there any questions before? Doesn't look like any questions. I think Senator Zucker does need to recuse himself from the comptroller's letter. And we'll note that in the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any questions? We have a motion from Chairperson Krim to allow OLA to proceed with these letters. I'll just say aye.
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 Any objections? Okay, seeing no objections, we will allow Mr. Hook and his team to proceed with the letters. And I did see a note from Delegate Harrison to me. I apologize. This, I think, came in after we moved on, but it looks like you have some additional procurement questions about DHCD and Spring Grove from the prior section. If you don't mind following up with Mr. Hook or the agencies, I think they would be forthcoming with a response.
Oh, most certainly.
Sure. Okay.
Are they basic? We answer them now. Are they simple, basic questions?
Well, I guess I'm just concerned that, again, it goes back to, in my opinion, trust in government, because if the agencies in your findings are continuing to have the same procurement practices where essentially, other individuals don't have an opportunity to truly participate in the procurement process, I find that to be a problem. And I guess it was, I think it was the hospital where it's the same people who are still in leadership who are doing the same thing, and they have the same findings. We have the same findings. And after 12 years, it's still going on, and it's the same people. And, I just find that troubling. I find that, management practice troubling, and that there isn't someone in a higher leadership position making sure that these things are rectified. Well, like I said, it goes back to trust in government. You hear the same thing all the time, that individuals never have an opportunity or have trouble actually participating in the procurement process in government. And I'm just going to say government in general, because I think it happens across all forms of government. But here we have findings that are just being repeated, and there's no penalty. And I think that there needs to be a penalty and a rectification.
There is, the Department of Budget and Management does have an audit compliance unit. There is a group of 4 people at DBM. It's actually headed by an ex-OLA employee. And I believe one of their tasks is to actually follow up on prior OLA report findings to see if the agencies are making progress to correct the problem. They don't do every audit. I mean, they pick and choose, but they do have, I think it's called the Audit Compliance Unit, and there is a mechanism in place at DBM for a selective review of what you're talking about. And then the health department, they have an Inspector General's office. So I think your question about the hospital might be directed at the health department as to why wasn't appropriate corrective action taken, or how could this ever have happened again after the first audit. There might be a committee, maybe should ask to send a question or a letter of concern to the health department on that matter.
So then I was going to follow up behind that with committee leadership, and I recognize that I am just kind of new to the committee, so trying to make sure that I fully understand. But I think that if we don't take some action and try to ensure that penalties are assessed, penalties whatever they are, then they're going to continue to take us as a joke as legislators. And in this committee, I mean, we get a finding and then there's nothing done. And for there to be repeat findings, particularly in this area, in my opinion, just seems to be inexcusable. And I'm not sure what the procedure would be for, going forward, but I think that something needs to be done and something needs to be said.
Well,
I don't want to speak on behalf of Chairperson Krim, but I think we
Okay.
share your concerns, and I think that's why Chairperson Krim earlier had actually asked Mr. Hook to see if there are other means to be able to ensure, improve compliance from different departments and agencies, and to report back to the committee on some of those possibilities, including what other states have done or are doing as well. I think we understand that concern and share it too. Chairperson Krim, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I just have a quick response there. In appropriations, we hear from every agency in our committees. So if you have a specific agency that you wish to ask a question, you can go to somebody on that subcommittee and give them the question that they will ask during that agency's hearing. Okay? And get an answer for you. And we do that every year. And we use audit findings to guide our questioning sometimes. So I just want to throw that out to you to make sure that you take advantage of that. Okay?
Thank you so much for your mentorship and leadership.
Well, if I could just tack on, I do believe that the Appropriations Committee has selected, I think, potentially 6 audits for presentation during the budget hearings this year. And that SBT, I believe, had selected potentially 2. So you will be hearing, I believe for certain agencies, you will be hearing a summary and a presentation made by our audit managers of relevant audit findings. And these are probably very significant agencies we're talking about, large agencies.
Okay, thank you. I see Senator Eckert had a hand.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Madam Chair. I just wanted to follow up on Delegate Harrison's comment. You're exactly right. And I don't understand why we just can't go ahead and ask the executive branch, both the Office of the Inspector General and also within DBM, what they're doing about some of these issues, if they're aware of it, and get their engagement in this. Haven't been on the audit committee for a long time. This has been a chronic problem of duplicate audits and having the same bad practices continue year after year. So I think it is in order that maybe we look and see what others are doing. But at the same time, let's tighten up the system we already have and hold people accountable to it in a variety of ways, and then follow up on that. Because I think that's the only way we're going to stay on top of it, is just to dog it. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Senator. The final comment from Delegate Valentino Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be quick, but I do want to thank my fellow delegate from Prince George's County for her continued concern about making sure that the public feels confident in what we do. And just to follow with Delegate Krim in the Appropriations Committee and in the Health Subcommittee, we do hear the audit findings, and we have roped off money before until they have done something about repeat findings. So again, I think taking this over to the Appropriations Committee and the subcommittees where we can, for repeat findings, rope off money until they do something, is something we've at least done before in the Health Subcommittee. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Thanks for pointing that out. I think we are at the end with closing remarks. Chairperson Krim, anything that you want to close with?
Just a big thank you to Mr. Hook and his staff, and also the agencies for coming and responding to the audits. And we're getting ready for the holidays, so everybody have a good holiday.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. So I just want to echo Chairperson Krim's remarks. Thank you to Greg Hook, all the folks at OLA for all of your hard work on this. We know that you work many, many hours to try to increase transparency and accountability in state government, and certainly want to extend our appreciation for all of your work in that line, and to committee staff and all of our staffs as well for working behind the scenes to make this happen. So with that, why don't we close? I think this is the last committee meeting before the session. We look forward to seeing folks, I guess, in person during the session.
Can I ask a quick question? Quick question?
Go
Sorry.
ahead, Delegate Valentina-Smith.
Before we adjourn, Mr. Hook, I know that we are anxiously awaiting any findings or review of the acquisition of the Korean tests and whether or not that's in audit right now, and whether we would expect to find anything with respect to the procurement of the Korean COVID testing kits.
Yeah, we are actually auditing that now. We're doing a special review on that, as well as the ventilators and a number of other significant procurements we identified. I really can't, because it's an ongoing audit, I can't disclose what
Just timing. Will we expect anything while we're in session preliminarily?
My gut reaction is no, but we're going to see what we can do to maybe get partial or maybe even a letter, but it would probably be towards the middle or towards the end of the session. I don't want to promise, but we do know it's sensitive and we are trying our best, but we are depending upon the cooperation of the agencies.
Thank you.
Senator Kramer.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I had no intention of adding anything further to the discussion, but thank you to Delegate Valentino-Smith for bringing that issue up. Will you also please look at, as part of this, if you can, Mr. Hook, the issue of Dana Dembrow being dismissed as part of your, looking at the audit, if that is something that can be done. I have concerns about how that happened and what has transpired. So if that's something that is within your capacity, it could be very interesting to get a better understanding.
I know that we spoke to that individual before they were forced out, retired. And I know we have their personal cell phone number. And I know we are planning to talk to them. And I saw the article in Maryland Matters this week also that the individual gave. So
thank you for that. And best wishes for the holidays to everyone. Good to see.
And Mr. Hook, I just want to put an exclamation point on what Delegate Valentino-Smith said as well. I had a conversation with the Senate President over the weekend, and I think there is interest in getting some kind of information back about the South Korean tests while we are still in session. And so would really try to emphasize that as well, even if it's preliminary information or on a limited basis. Anything that you can provide back would be very, very helpful. I see Mike Powell had come on just to show his face. I don't know if you had anything else to add on that. I know you're working on something that should come out in January as well, right?
Sure. Just to note that we are doing a program evaluation related to emergency procurement. And we expect to have that. I don't want to overpromise on this, but my goal is to have that in January available to you. Unlike an audit, which Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, is generally looking at whether things were done the way that they were supposed to. We've instead sort of looked at the capability the state has to do emergency procurements over time and tried to understand how valuable that's been for the state. Where it is limited and how it might be improved. And so while we have not looked at like transactions in a way that Greg's folks may, we expect to have some observations and recommendations related to emergency procurement available to the General Assembly.
Great, thank you for sharing that, Mr. Powell. We look forward to that. It doesn't look like there are any other questions. No one's going to squeak in here before the end with a question. I think we are adjourned. So everyone stay safe over the holidays, and we look forward to seeing you in session in about a month.
Happy New Year.
Take care.
Happy holidays.